There is a real place in the Pacific Ocean, a thin ring of coral called Bikini Atoll, where the United States detonated nuclear bombs again and again through the 1940s and 1950s, until the water there glowed and the fish went strange. And the happiest cartoon ever made, the one about the little yellow sponge who laughs at nothing and loves his job at a fast food restaurant, is set directly underneath it. That is not a fan theory. That is the address on the envelope. Tonight, on Krabby, we are going through every disturbing SpongeBob theory there is, from the nuclear one that turned out to be half true, to the drug maps and the death readings and the lost episode that never existed. And I am going to tell you honestly which ones hold up and which ones fall apart the moment you touch them. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, let your shoulders drop, and if you have not subscribed yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these long, quiet ones for you. Let us begin at the bottom of the ocean. To understand why so many dark readings cling to this particular cartoon, you have to start with the man who made it, because he is the first surprise and the least talked about. Stephen Hillenburg was not a comedy writer who happened to like the sea. He was a marine biologist. That is the fact everything else grows out of. He was born on the 21st of August, 1961, and long before he ever drew a sponge with buck teeth, he studied natural resource planning and interpretation, and then he took a job teaching marine biology at an ocean institute in California, standing in front of tide pools, explaining to visitors how the small, strange animals of the shallows actually lived. He knew what a real sea sponge was, he knew what a real starfish was, and a real sea snail, and a real copepod, which is the tiny drifting creature that plankton is named after. Only after years of that did he go back to school for an art degree, earning a master's in experimental animation in 1992, and folding the two halves of his life together into a single cartoon. So when people say SpongeBob is secretly about biology, or secretly about the ocean being a real and slightly frightening place, they are not reaching. The person who built it spent his 20s knee-deep in cold water, learning exactly how brutal and odd a tide pool can be. He set his story on the actual floor of the actual Pacific, and he populated it with animals he had held in his own hands. I think that is the quiet key to this entire video, so I want to put it down early. The reason these theories stick to SpongeBob and slide right off other cartoons is that the ground underneath the jokes is real. The setting is a real ocean. The creator was a real scientist. The name of the town is the name of a place where real bombs went off. Most cartoons are built on air. This one is built on salt water and history has teeth. Hillenburg himself, I should say plainly, was by every account a gentle and thoughtful man who wanted to make children happy and to make the sea feel wondrous rather than terrifying. He was diagnosed with a disease called ALS in the spring of 2017, and he died on the 26th of November 2018, and his ashes were scattered in the Pacific that he loved. I mention that now, at the start, because a lot of what follows treats his cheerful little cartoon as if it were secretly a horror story he was hiding from us, and it was not. But he did build it on real and heavy foundations, and that is why the theories have something to hold on to. Keep him in mind as we go. He is the reassuring hand under all of this. Now, the nuclear theory. If you only remember one thing from tonight, this is the one to keep, because it is the single dark reading that turned out to have real weight behind it, and almost everyone tells it wrong by treating it as pure internet speculation. Here is the claim in its plainest form. Bikini Bottom, the town where SpongeBob lives, sits at the bottom of the sea beneath Bikini Atoll, and the reason every creature down there can talk and walk and play the clarinet and build robots and generally behave like a small deranged human town is that they are all the mutated descendants of sea life, warped by decades of nuclear testing. The sponge became a person, the starfish became a person, the squid, I should say the octopus, became a person. Radiation did it. That is the theory. Let us walk the evidence, because this is where it gets interesting. Bikini Atoll is real. It is a ring of coral in the Marshall Islands, out in the middle of the Pacific, and between 1946 and 1958, the United States used it as a nuclear proving ground, detonating roughly 23 nuclear devices there over those years. Some were dropped from the air, some were floated on ships, and at least one, the famous underwater test, threw a colossal column of irradiated water into the sky in a shape that anyone who has seen a mushroom cloud would recognize instantly. The people who actually lived on Bikini Atoll, real human beings, were moved off their islands before the tests, and the atoll remains contaminated to this day. This is not folklore. This is documented 20th century history, and it is genuinely grim, far grimmer than anything the cartoon ever shows you. So the fans who first noticed this were not inventing a connection, they were reading the map. The town is named Bikini Bottom because it sits beneath Bikini Atoll, and Bikini Atoll is a place humanity poisoned with atom bombs. The theory, as internet theories do, grew from there. People pointed at the general strangeness of the residents as proof of mutation. They pointed at Rock Bottom, that pitch-black town in the deep trench below the main city, and reimagined it as a bomb crater full of creatures warped even further by the blast. They noticed that certain explosions in the cartoon puff upward in that same unmistakable mushroom shape, and they said, "There, that is the show admitting what it is." For years, this all sat in the same bin as every other fan reading, a fun idea with no official backing. The kind of thing you argue about and then let go. And then it stopped being just a theory, which is the part that makes this one special. The franchise itself began to nod at it. In the spin-off called The Patrick Star Show, which arrived in 2021, there is a sequence set in a 1940s version of Bikini Bottom that stages nuclear testing happening right there inside the fiction, folding the real history of the atoll directly into the story. That alone made a lot of people sit up. But the firmest confirmation came later. In December of 2024, one of the series' longtime writers and performers, the man who voices Plankton, who goes by Mr. Lawrence, publicly stated that Bikini Bottom is meant to represent the theoretical results of the atomic testing at Bikini Atoll. Read that slowly. A person who has actually written this cartoon for years said, out loud, that the town is what you would theoretically get if you nuked a real reef and let the sea life keep going. That is not a Reddit user guessing. That is the creative team confirming the subtext. So here is how I want you to hold this one, because the register matters. It is not confirmed that the writers sat down on day one in 1999 and designed everything as a nuclear parable. That would be overstating it. What is confirmed is that the setting does refer to the real atomic testing, that the franchise has visually acknowledged that history inside its own fiction, and that a longtime writer has said the mutation reading is essentially correct. So when someone tells you the nuclear theory is just a creepy thing kids made up, they are behind on the news. Of all the dark theories we will go through tonight, this is the one that graduated. It walked out of speculation and into acknowledged subtext. The cheerful yellow sponge really does live on top of a reef, as poisoned as anywhere on Earth. And the people who make him have now said, plainly, that this was the point. I find that quietly staggering, and I think it is the perfect place to begin, because it sets the tone for everything else. It tells you the cartoon is willing to be built on something dark and real, which is exactly why the other theories feel like they might have somewhere to land. Most of them will not, and I will be honest with you, every time one falls apart. But this first one held, and it held hard, so let us carry that forward into the deep water, and see what else is down here. The next family of theories all share one shape, and once you notice the shape you can never quite unsee it. The idea is that each of the main characters is secretly a stand-in for something, that the friendly little cast is really a coded chart, and that if you line them up correctly, you will read a hidden message the cartoon is supposedly sending. There are 3 big versions of this, and they overlap and borrow from one another, so I want to take them one at a time and be clear at every step which parts are real and which parts are people playing a very fun game with themselves. The first version is the oldest, and the one people quote most. It says that the 7 main characters each embody one of the 7 deadly sins. The mapping fans reach for goes like this. SpongeBob is lust, though almost everyone who uses this map quickly softens lust into something like eagerness or appetite or raw enthusiasm, because a children's sponge is obviously not a figure of sexual desire, and the sins are being read loosely as overpowering drives rather than adult vices. Patrick is sloth, which barely needs arguing, since he lives under a rock, sleeps constantly, and treats effort as a personal insult. Squidward is wrath, all that simmering resentment and short temper and slammed doors. Sandy is pride, the confident overachiever who is sure she is the smartest and toughest creature in the sea. Mr. Krabs is greed, and honestly, if you were going to hand out only one of these with total confidence, it would be that one. Plankton is envy, forever coveting what Mr. Krabs has and scheming to take it. And Gary, the snail, gets gluttony, the endless appetite, always meowing to be fed. Now, on the surface, that is a tidy little chart, and I understand why it spread. Each label sort of fits if you squint. But here is where I have to slow you down, because this is exactly the kind of theory that gets repeated as if it were the show's secret blueprint, and it is not. The characters were designed as comedy archetypes first, exaggerated personalities built to bounce off each other, and any set of 7 strong exaggerated personalities is going to loosely map onto 7 famous vices, because the vices are just extreme versions of ordinary human traits. When one of the writers, the same Mr. Lawrence who confirmed the nuclear subtext, was asked about the 7 sins idea, he did not embrace it as the master plan. He acknowledged that the characters have sharp distinctions from one another, which of course they do, that is what makes them funny, but he pushed back on the notion that they were deliberately built as a one-to-one map of the deadly sins. So the honest verdict is this: it is a clever after-the-fact reading, not a designed code. It is the kind of pattern the human brain loves to find and the writers never actually planted. Enjoy it as a game and hold it loosely, because the person who would know says it was not the plan. The second version of the same shape swaps the sins for drugs, and this one is darker and shakier, and, I will be frank, the least defensible of the whole night, so I want to handle it carefully. The claim is that each main character represents a specific drug, and that the friendly cartoon is quietly a portrait of addiction. The mapping runs roughly like this. SpongeBob is hallucinogenic mushrooms. Because of the trippy imagination, the wild visual leaps, the sudden swings from ecstatic joy to sobbing. Patrick is marijuana, because he is relaxed to the point of horizontal, perpetually hungry, slow of speech, and completely unbothered. Squidward is heroin, and the reasoning offered is his general air of a person going through withdrawal, the poor performance at work, the avoidance, the mood swings, the sense of a life that has quietly collapsed. Mr. Krabs gets cocaine, all that jittery paranoia about his money and his secret formula. Mrs. Puff, the driving instructor, sometimes gets folded in as cocaine too, for her frazzled, on-edge reactions to SpongeBob wrecking her car over and over. And Sandy, notably, is cast as the sober one, the clean and clear-headed outsider who is constantly a little annoyed by the behavior of everyone around her. I have to be careful here, because that map can feel eerily persuasive if you are in the right mood, and that is precisely its problem. It is persuasive the way a horoscope is persuasive. You can attach a drug to any personality if you are willing to stretch, and once you have decided Squidward is on heroin, every miserable slump he does reads as evidence, when really, he is just a cartoon of a frustrated middle-aged artist stuck in a job he hates. There is no confirmation of any kind behind this reading. No writer statement, no production note, nothing at all. It is pure fan invention, and it leans on the same trick as the sins map, taking strong exaggerated traits and assigning each one a heavy real-world label. The reason it feels darker is that drugs are darker than the abstract idea of a sin, and the reason it spreads is that darkness spreads. But there is nothing under it. I am telling you plainly, this one is speculation resting on air, and the only reason it is worth mentioning at all is that it gets repeated so often, and you deserve to know it has no floor beneath it. The third version is the one that has caught fire most recently, and it is also the one I step around most carefully, because it can do real harm if it is told badly. This is the reading that assigns each character a specific mental illness or clinical diagnosis. It goes around on video sites and gathers millions of views, and the common version runs like this. SpongeBob is given attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, sometimes autism, sometimes obsessive-compulsive tendencies or social anxiety, all read off his restlessness and his intense routines and his boundless scattered energy. Squidward is given depression, specifically the long, low grinding kind, the persistent kind that colors everyday gray. Patrick is read as having an intellectual disability. Sandy is assigned borderline personality disorder. Mr. Krabs is given narcissism, or obsessive-compulsive disorder, or a delusional fixation, all built around his relationship with his money. Plankton gets a cerebral, calculating narcissism. And Mrs. Puff, the poor woman whose car and life are destroyed on a weekly basis by the same student, is read as living with post-traumatic stress. Here is where I plant my feet, because this one deserves it. As a game, as a way of noticing that these characters are written with real emotional texture, it is not nothing. Squidward genuinely does behave like someone carrying a long sadness, and we will come back to him, because the writing does more with that than with any other character. But turning a cartoon cast into a diagnostic chart is reductive, and when it is done carelessly, it flattens real conditions that real people live with into cartoon shorthand, which is why a lot of thoughtful people have pushed back hard on it. There is no official confirmation that any character was written to depict a specific clinical disorder. What is true, and worth keeping, is that the writing is emotionally observant enough that these readings can attach at all. A shallow cartoon would give you nothing to diagnose. This one gives you enough that people try. So I would hold this the same way as the others. It is an interpretation, sometimes an insightful one, and sometimes a harmful one. Never a confirmed design, and the healthiest way to enjoy it is to let it point you back at the writing rather than at a label. What ties these three theories together, the sins and the drugs and the disorders, is a single instinct, the instinct to believe that a cartoon this beloved must be hiding a key. And I understand the instinct, because I have it too. But the honest truth, the one I keep landing on tonight, is that the characters are not a coded map of anything. They are just written with unusual sharpness, sharp enough that any strong system of 7 labels will seem to click into place. The click is real, the code is not. Hold that, and let us go somewhere the writing actually does get dark on purpose, which is the food. The Krabby Patty is the beating heart of the whole cartoon. It is the thing everyone wants, the thing the town runs on, the reason the villain schemes, and the reason the hero flips burgers with something close to religious joy. And there is a theory about it that has haunted this world almost since the beginning. One of the oldest and most repeated dark readings there is. The theory is that the Krabby Patty is made of crab. That the secret ingredient, the mysterious thing that makes it taste so good, is the ground-up flesh of Mr. Krabs' own kind. And if that is true, then Mr. Krabs, a crab, is running a restaurant that serves crab meat, which would make him a cannibal, and would make the whole cheerful town complicit in eating one of their own. The fans who believe this point to a few things, and I will lay them out fairly because some of them are genuinely eerie. The first is the name. It is not called the fish patty or the sea patty. It is called the Krabby Patty, named after the crab who sells it, and there is a reading of that name that turns your stomach a little if you let it. The second piece of evidence is a real line, and this is the one that gets quoted the most, so let me anchor it properly. In the episode called Midlife Crustacean, Mr. Krabs takes a bite of a Krabby Patty and says, "So that is what I taste like." That is a genuine line from the series. And out of context, it is precisely the sort of line that lights a theory on fire, because it sounds like a confession. He bites the burger, he recognizes the flavor, and the flavor is himself. The third piece is more of an observation about the world. Fans notice that in a town full of every imaginable kind of sea creature, you almost never see other crabs walking around. Mr. Krabs and his family are crabs, and beyond them, the species is oddly scarce. And the dark reading fills that silence with a horrible answer. Where did all the other crabs go? They went into the patties. So that is the theory, and it is well built, and it is also, I am glad to tell you, officially wrong. Nickelodeon, the network that owns SpongeBob, actually addressed this directly. They posted a public statement saying, in plain words, that they can 100% confirm that Krabby Patties are not made from crabs. That is about as close to a definitive answer as you will ever get from the people who own a piece of fiction. The burger is not crab. Mr. Krabs is not secretly grinding up his relatives. The most famous dark food theory of the whole franchise has a clean official denial stamped across it. And there is a deeper layer of canon logic that supports the denial, which I find more satisfying than the network statement, because it comes from inside the world rather than from a press account. Informed by its marine biologist creator, the cartoon has long operated on a quiet rule about food. The Krabby Patty contains no meat. The rival restaurant across the street, the Chum Bucket, sells chum, and chum is entirely meat, the ground-up remains of dead fish used as bait. And this is the elegant part. There is a fan reading, and it is a good one, for why the Chum Bucket fails so completely while the Krusty Krab thrives. And it fits the biology. Many of the creatures of Bikini Bottom would in the real ocean be bottom feeders, animals that eat detritus and plant matter and the soft leftovers of the seafloor, not predators tearing into flesh. A restaurant built entirely on meat would repel them, a meatless patty would not. So the town flocks to the meatless burger and recoils from the meat one, which is exactly what we see, and which quietly undercuts the cannibalism theory from a completely different direction. The patty is popular precisely because it is not made of anyone. Now, I do not want to tie this up too neatly, because there is one honest piece of mystery left, and it is the good kind. We know the Krabby Patty is not crab, We do not know what it actually is. The true secret formula, the specific combination of ingredients that makes the burger what it is, has never once been revealed in the canon. Fans have guessed at everything: sea plants, some special seaweed, even the sentimental answer that the secret ingredient is love. But every one of those is a guess. The recipe has stayed locked away for 27 years now, which is an impressive act of discipline for a franchise this large. And speaking of locked away, I want to correct something that even careful fans get wrong about that formula, because it changes the shape of the whole Mr. Krabs mythology. People say the formula is a secret known only to Mr. Krabs, guarded like a dragon's hoard, kept under his mattress where he sleeps on top of it. Almost every part of that is off. The formula is normally kept locked away inside the Krusty Krab. The idea that he keeps it under his mattress actually turns up in more than one episode, though just as often the show locks the formula away in a safe or a vault instead. And crucially, Mr. Krabs is not the only one who has it. By most accounts, SpongeBob carries the formula somewhere in his memory, since he is the one who actually cooks the patties, though the show has never been fully consistent about how much of it he truly remembers. Read that again, because it undoes the lone guardian image completely. The recipe's secrecy rests on a fry cook. And it has been broken before. In the 2004 movie, Plankton actually succeeds in stealing the formula and using it, running his own version of the operation off the back of it before the day is saved. So the picture of Mr. Krabs as the sole keeper of an unbreakable secret is a myth. The secret is real, but it has leaked, it has been shared, and the person who cooks with it every single day could recite it in his sleep. I think the reason the cannibalism theory refuses to die, even after an official denial, is that Mr. Krabs truly is the darkest of the main characters, and the theory feels like it ought to be true, even though it is not. This is a crab who would sell you anything, who loves money in a way that is played for laughs, but is honestly a little frightening when you look straight at it. And we will come back to him later tonight, because there is a reading of Mr. Krabs that holds up far better than the cannibal one, and disturbs me more. For now, land here. The burger is not crab. The town is not eating its own. But the recipe is still a mystery. After 25 years, the fry cook could recite it by heart, and the villain has already cracked it once. The food is safe. The crab who sells it is the part you should keep an eye on. Let us move from the restaurant to the sponge himself, because there is a theory about SpongeBob's own mind that is more tender than most of the dark ones, and it has taken on a strange life of its own in the real world. The theory is that SpongeBob is a war veteran, that before the series begins, he served, that he came home carrying something heavy from combat, and that the relentless cheer we watch every episode is not simplicity at all, but a coping mechanism, the disciplined, almost frantic positivity of a man holding himself together by living every single day as hard and as brightly as he can. The evidence fans assemble for this is, I have to admit, more coherent than you would expect. Look at how SpongeBob is built. He runs on a rigid daily routine, up at the same time, the same jellyfishing, the same march to the same job, a structure so fixed it borders on the military. His dedication to that job is not normal enthusiasm. It is total, obsessive. The devotion of someone who needs a mission to organize the day around or he will fall apart. He uses the language of service, calling people sir, snapping to attention, treating the fry cook post like a sacred duty. He is obsessed with karate, which is to say with disciplined, ritualized hand-to-hand combat, practiced constantly with Sandy. And in the episodes where the town faces some threat, he is weirdly, unnervingly good under pressure, calm and precise and capable, in a way that sits oddly against his usual goofiness. Put all of that together, the theory says, and you are not looking at a happy idiot. You are looking at a trained, disciplined man who has learned to weaponize routine and joy against something dark he does not talk about. Now, I want to be honest about the register here, because this is squarely a fan interpretation, and nothing in the canon confirms it. SpongeBob has no stated military past. He is a fry cook and a boating school student and an aspiring jellyfisher, and that is all the text gives us. The theory works by taking traits that have perfectly ordinary explanations. A cheerful person likes routine. A devoted employee takes his job seriously. A kid who admires his heroes wants to learn karate, and reframing all of them through a single darker lens. That is the same move we saw with the drug map, and it deserves the same caution. It is a reading, not a reveal. But I do not want to wave it away entirely, and here is why. because this one has a real-world echo that moves me. There is a scene in the 2004 movie, the one people call the Goofy Goober moment, where SpongeBob, having been broken down and humiliated and pushed to the absolute end of himself, falls apart completely and then finds a way to stand back up. And that scene, the collapse and the recovery, has been quietly embraced in some military circles as a touchstone for emotional release, a thing people who have carried heavy things point to when they need permission to feel it and then keep going. That is not canon. Nothing on screen ever says SpongeBob is a soldier, but real people who have served have found something true in him, some resonance between his desperate, disciplined joy and the way you actually have to live after you have seen too much. And I think that resonance is why the veteran theory refuses to feel silly, even though it is unproven. It is not describing the text. It is describing something the character accidentally captures, which is what it looks like to be relentlessly, effortfully happy on purpose, as a kind of survival. So hold the veteran theory as a feeling rather than a fact. There is no dog tag, no flashback, no line that confirms it. What there is a character whose happiness is so total and so structured that it reads, to some people, as the discipline of a survivor, and a movie scene that real survivors have taken as their own. That is the honest shape of it, and it is a gentler kind of darkness than most of what we have covered, so let it settle softly. There is a companion reading to the veteran one that I want to place beside it, because it aims at the same character from a different and sadder angle, and it is the one a lot of adults quietly recognize. This reading is not about discipline or combat. It is about need. It says that SpongeBob's defining trait, underneath all the joy, is a bottomless, almost frightening need to be loved and approved of, and that his relentless happiness is powered less by genuine contentment than by terror of not being wanted. Watch him with that in mind, and it is hard to unsee. He does not just like his job, he needs Mr. Krabs to be proud of him. Needs it so badly that a single word of disapproval can shatter him. He does not just want friends, he pursues affection, with a desperation that occasionally curdles into something uncomfortable, smothering the people around him, unable to tolerate even a moment of someone not being delighted with him. The times SpongeBob becomes genuinely unsettling to watch are almost always these. The moments his need is exposed, when the cheerful surface cracks, and underneath it is a creature that cannot bear to be disliked, that will debase itself, exhaust itself, remake itself entirely, to win back a scrap of approval it feels slipping away. The reading takes that and says, the happiness is a performance, a frantic and continuous effort to earn love that he is never quite sure he has, and that Squidward, the person who most consistently withholds approval from him, is therefore the person SpongeBob is most drawn to and most desperate to win over, chasing the one creature who will not simply give him what he needs. There is something to that. The dynamic between them does look, at times, exactly like a person compulsively seeking validation from the one source guaranteed to deny it. And read this way, SpongeBob's joy becomes effortful and a little heartbreaking, the smile of someone who believes, at some level, that the moment they stop being useful and delightful, they will be abandoned, and who therefore never, ever stops. I want to stay fair here, because this is projection as much as anything. The same move of stacking a character's most anxious moments and ignoring his secure ones. Most of the time, SpongeBob's happiness reads as exactly what it presents as, uncomplicated delight in a life he loves, and there are plenty of moments where he is content and steady and not performing for anyone. So the desperate reading is a lens, not the truth of him. But it is a lens that catches something real, both about the character and about the people who see themselves in him, because a great many of us know exactly what it is to power our brightness with fear, to be the cheerful one, the helpful one, the easy one, because some quiet part of us believes that is the rent we pay to be kept. If you have ever felt that, SpongeBob's smile can look very different, and the theory is really just that recognition given a shape. Where I land is gentle, and it points ahead to something I will come back to at the very end, so hold it loosely for now. The story, I think, offers its own answer to this reading, an answer rooted in what SpongeBob literally is, and it is kinder than the theory. But that is for later, when we reach the creature at the center of the abyss. For now, set the desperate reading beside the veteran one. Two different shadows cast on the same relentless brightness, both of them telling you more about the person looking than about the sponge, and both of them dissolving, a little, In the light he keeps giving off, no matter how hard we stare, trying to find the dark behind it. And then, standing at the edge of all these death and darkness readings, there is a character who is literally a ghost, and who the cartoon uses, again and again, as its own figure of death. I mean the Flying Dutchman, and I think he is among the strongest pieces of evidence for the idea that Bikini Bottom is a world where death and the afterlife are real and close at hand. The Flying Dutchman is a canon character, a green glowing pirate ghost who sails the seas of Bikini Bottom, and his backstory, as the cartoon tells it, is honestly grim under the comedy. After he died, the story goes, a clothing shop used his body as a display in their window, and because of that indignity he was never properly put to rest, and so he roams, unable to find peace, haunting the waters and collecting souls. Read that as the children's gag it is presented as, and it is silly. Read it straight, and it is the story of a man denied a grave, doomed to wander. And the cartoon uses him exactly the way older cultures use their death figures. In one episode, he comes for Mr. Krabs, trying to drag him down to the undersea afterlife, a place the story actually names, Davy Jones's Locker, which functions in this world as a kind of hell, not for the wicked in general, but specifically for the cheap and the stingy. He collects souls, he judges, he drags people to the bottom. Depending on the episode, he swings between a straightforward demon, a restless, unhappy spirit, and something closer to a psychopomp, one of those figures whose job is to ferry the dead from one world to the next. He is, in other words, the Grim Reaper of Bikini Bottom, and he is not a theory. He is on the screen. I bring him up here on purpose, because he is the hinge between the personal darkness we have been discussing and the bigger cosmic readings we are about to reach. The reason people can theorize that everyone in Bikini Bottom is dead, that the whole town is an afterlife, is that the writers have already built the machinery for it and shown it to us. There is a hell down there. There is a ghost who collects souls. There is a place the dead are dragged. Now, and this is the careful part, the existence of that machinery does not prove the everyone is dead theory. A world can contain ghosts and an afterlife without every resident being a ghost, exactly as our own myths do. But it does mean the theorists are not inventing from nothing. They are noticing that a comedy for 6-year-olds softly installed a full set of death and judgment fixtures, and then used them, more than once, with a completely straight face. Keep the Dutchman in your mind as we go deeper, because the deeper we go, the more this cheerful ocean starts to look like a place that knows exactly what death is. If SpongeBob is the character people read as hiding pain behind joy, Squidward is the character who does not bother to hide it at all, and the writers have done more with his sadness and done it more deliberately than with anything else on this list. This is the one where interpretation and canon get closest to touching, so I want to spend real time here. The fan reading is simple to state. Squidward is depressed. Not cartoonishly grumpy, not just a killjoy for the plot, but depressed in the long, gray, clinical sense. A creature living a life that has disappointed him at every turn, and who has run out of the energy to pretend otherwise. And unlike most of the theories tonight, the series seems to actually agree with this one, or at least to lean into it on purpose. Squidward is an artist who cannot make art anyone wants. He is a musician whose clarinet playing is painfully bad, and he does not know it, which is its own small tragedy. He works a job he despises, at a counter he hates, serving food he finds beneath him, for a boss he cannot respect, next to a coworker whose boundless happiness is a daily insult to his misery. He lives alone. His great loves, refinement and beauty and recognition, are things his world has no room for. The cartoon returns to this again and again, and it does not always play it for laughs. Sometimes it lets Squidward be deeply, recognizably sad, and lets you feel the weight of a life spent wanting to be seen as special by people who will never see him that way. But the piece of evidence that makes the Squidward reading more than a mood, the episode people point to as the moment it stared straight into the abyss, is one from the very first season, called SB-129, and I want to walk it carefully, because it is one of the strangest things ever put in a children's cartoon, and it earns every bit of its reputation. In the episode, Squidward, desperate to escape SpongeBob and Patrick for a single peaceful weekend, hides himself inside the Krusty Krab freezer. He is accidentally frozen there, and he stays frozen not for a night, not for a week, but for 2,000 years. When he finally thaws, everything he knew is gone. He stumbles into a future he does not understand, then gets hold of a time machine and bounces through eras trying to find his way home, past a prehistoric version of the world, and forward again, and at one point, he is dropped into a place the episode simply calls nowhere. Nowhere is the part that stays with you. It is an infinite white void, an endless empty nothing in every direction. No floor, no sky, no other living thing. And Squidward, alone in it, begins to unravel. He says the word alone, and the word does not vanish. It hangs in the air as a floating shape, and then more of them appear, and eerie echoing voices begin to repeat it back to him. Alone, alone, until the emptiness itself seems to be answering him with his own loneliness. He panics. He runs from nothing across a floor of nothing while the void whispers the one thing he is most afraid of. For a cartoon that is mostly about a sponge laughing at a jellyfish, this is a genuine, undisguised depiction of existential terror, the specific horror of being conscious and utterly alone, with no one to hear you and nothing to hold on to. I do not think it is a stretch to say that is a picture of depression, and of the particular fear that sits underneath it, the fear that you are fundamentally alone and always will be. The episode is a comedy, and it resolves, and Squidward makes it home. But the image of him in that white nothing, screaming a single word back at a void that only answers with the same word, is the kind of thing that lodges in a person and does not leave. Children who watched it in 1999 still bring it up as adults, and they bring it up because it named something they did not have words for yet. So here is what I want to land on with Squidward, because it is a little different from everything before it. With those coded maps, the sins and the drugs and the diagnoses, the darkness was projected onto the characters by fans reaching for a hidden key. With Squidward, the darkness is right there in the text, put there on purpose, handled with a surprising amount of care. He is the proof that the writers knew exactly how to be sad, that they could go to the emptiest place imaginable and stand there for a whole episode, and that they chose, most of the time, not to, precisely because they knew how much it would hurt. That restraint is what makes the rare moments land. They could always see the void. They just usually kept the freezer door closed. And it is worth saying, because it feeds directly into the biggest theories we are building toward, that if you already believe Squidward is a portrait of a life stuck on repeat, an endless cycle of the same miserable day at the same hated job, then the leap to the notion that Bikini Bottom might be a kind of purgatory does not feel so wild anymore. That is the ground the afterlife theorists are standing on. They look at Squidward, condemned to the same grinding Tuesday forever, and they ask the obvious next question. What if that is not just Squidward? What if that is the whole town? Hold that thought, because we are going to open it all the way up soon. But first, let me take you through the episodes where the writing did not need a theory to be disturbing, the ones that were dark on the day they aired, on purpose, with the network's blessing. I think it is important, on a video about disturbing theories, to be clear about a distinction that a lot of people blur. Most of what we have covered so far is fans reading darkness into a bright cartoon. But the writers also, on plenty of occasions, put the darkness there themselves, in aired episodes, with full production sign-off. And those episodes are the reason the theories feel plausible in the first place. If SpongeBob had never once gone to a frightening place on its own, nobody would believe it was hiding one. So let me take you through the canonically dark episodes, the real ones, starting with the one that unsettles people most gently, and building to the one that frightens them worst. The gentlest of them is called Rock Bottom, from the first season, and it is a masterpiece of tone. The setup is almost nothing. SpongeBob and Patrick have a lovely day at an amusement park called Glove World, and on the way home, they get on the wrong bus. That is it. That is the whole horror engine. They take the wrong bus, and it carries them down, and down, past the lit and familiar part of the ocean, into a place far below Bikini Bottom, called Rock Bottom. And Rock Bottom is dark. Not dark as in evil, dark as in lightless. A town at the bottom of a deep trench where the sun does not reach, populated by strange anglerfish and deep-sea creatures who do not speak the way the surface world does. Their language is full of odd raspberry noises SpongeBob cannot reproduce or understand. He cannot read the signs. He cannot work the machines. He tries to catch a bus back up, and the bus keeps pulling away the instant he turns his back, over and over. A small, perfect nightmare of almost escaping and never quite managing it, until he is left alone in the dark, far from home, unable to communicate, watching the way out slip away again and again. What makes Rock Bottom stay with people is that it does not look like a horror episode and it does not sound like one, and yet it produces the exact texture of a real anxiety dream. There are two readings of it that I find persuasive, and they do not cancel each other out. The first is that it is a portrait of depression, of what the phrase rock bottom actually means. That sudden drop out of the warm lit world into a cold place below everything familiar, where you cannot make yourself understood, and the way back up keeps receding the moment you reach for it. The second reading is that it is about the immigrant experience, the disorientation of arriving somewhere. The language is not yours, the signs are unreadable, the customs are strange, and the simplest task, catching a bus, going home, becomes a maze. Both readings fit because the episode is built on a universal feeling, the feeling of being lost somewhere you cannot navigate, and it earns that feeling without a single monster. It is the writing proving it could frighten you with nothing but a dark bus stop and a language you do not speak. And then there is the one that is hard to watch, the one that a lot of longtime fans consider the single darkest thing the series ever aired, called One Course Meal, from the 7th season. I am going to describe it plainly, because it matters, and I am going to keep it careful. The episode is about Plankton, the tiny villain, and it reveals that Plankton has a deep, paralyzing phobia of whales. Mr. Krabs discovers this, and instead of using it for a normal cartoon scheme, Mr. Krabs weaponizes it. He disguises himself as his own daughter Pearl, who is a whale, and he uses that disguise to terrorize Plankton, to trigger his phobia deliberately and repeatedly, to torment him past the point of comedy. And the episode takes Plankton to a place cartoons almost never go. Broken down by the relentless fear, Plankton gives up. He lies down in the middle of a road and waits to be run over. It depicts a character attempting to end his own life, played inside what is nominally a comedy about a burger restaurant. That is disturbing on its own. What makes it worse, and what turned it into an episode that drew more protest than almost any other in the whole run, is that Mr. Krabs faces no consequence for any of it. He is not punished. He is not shown to have done a terrible thing. The narrative largely lets him walk away from having tormented a person into wanting to die. Viewers were, rightly, horrified. There were petitions to have it pulled. And here I want to correct a thing people often say, because getting it right matters. The episode was never officially banned. As far as fans have pieced together, whatever outrage followed it never came close to erasing the episode from existence. What happened is quieter and truer, which is that the network and the crew seem to have recognized it went too far, and the episode simply rarely airs now, tucked away, brought up mostly by fans as the example of the moment the cartoon crossed a line it should not have crossed. So do not say it was banned. Say it was a genuine mistake that got mostly buried, an episode that took a real and serious subject and handled it with a carelessness that still makes people angry years later. I bring up One Course Meal not to be lurid, but because it is the strongest evidence for something true about this cartoon, and it is the thing I keep circling back to tonight. The darkness in SpongeBob is not only in the eye of the theorist. Sometimes it is right there on the network's own schedule, aired to children, depicting a suicide attempt and letting the tormentor go free. When people say this world has a shadow, this is the episode that proves they are not imagining it. It is the writing at its worst, and its most revealing. The moment the cheerful surface cracked and something truly bleak showed through, and it explains, more than any fan theory could, why so many people are willing to believe there is more darkness hidden in the rest of it. When a cartoon has actually done this, once, on purpose, you start to wonder what else it is capable of. Let me show you a few more of the times it went there deliberately, though thankfully none quite this heavy. There is an episode from the 3rd season called Nasty Patty that is, structurally, a full crime thriller wearing a cartoon's face. It even announces itself. It opens on a dark and stormy night, the classic frame for a horror story, and what unfolds is a plot about guilt and a hidden body. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs are expecting a health inspector at the Krusty Krab, and through a chain of misunderstandings, they come to believe that they have accidentally killed him. They think there is a dead man in their restaurant, and so, rather than a story about a burger, you get a story about two characters, convinced they are now murderers, deciding what to do with a corpse, burying the body, and then spending the rest of the episode sweating through the specific paranoia of people who believe they have gotten away with a killing and might yet be caught. It is played for comedy, and it resolves, and the inspector turns out to be fine. But the machinery of it, the buried body, the frantic cover-up, the guilt curdling into fear, is lifted directly from adult crime fiction, and the episode knows exactly what it is doing. It is a cartoon about the psychology of hiding a death, and it works because it commits to that feeling completely. Then there is Graveyard Shift, from the second season, which is the purest and most successful horror episode of the bunch, and honestly among the more frightening things it ever made. The premise is small and mean. Mr. Krabs, greedy as ever, decides to keep the Krusty Krab open 24 hours a day to squeeze out more money, which means SpongeBob and Squidward now work terrifying, empty overnight shifts. To pass the time, and to torment SpongeBob a little, Squidward invents a ghost story. He makes up a monster called the Hash-Slinging Slasher, a spectral former fry cook, and he piles on the details, the signs that the slasher is coming, the flickering lights, the bus that arrives carrying the ghost, the phone that rings with no one on the other end. He invents all of it to scare SpongeBob. And then, one by one, the invented omens start to come true. The lights flicker exactly as he described. The phone rings. The bus pulls up. Squidward, who made the whole thing up, is now watching his own lie assemble itself into reality around him, and his growing terror is the real horror of the episode, the specific dread of a skeptic being forced to believe. It builds genuine atmosphere, real suspense, in a way that has nothing to do with any fan theory. This is a cartoon choosing to be scary and being very good at it. And there is one more in this family that I find subtly heartbreaking rather than scary, called Dying for Pie, also from the second season. In it, Squidward, forced into a friendship exercise with SpongeBob, buys him a pie. What Squidward does not fully realize until too late is that the pie is actually a bomb, sold to him by a shady pirate, and he comes to believe that SpongeBob has eaten it and will explode. So, Squidward spends the entire day convinced that his coworker, the sponge whose happiness usually irritates him beyond words, is going to die at any moment because of him. And something shifts in him. Believing SpongeBob is doomed and feeling responsible for it, Squidward sets about granting him a perfect final day, indulging his every wish, being kind to him in a way he never otherwise is, all under the weight of a secret grief and guilt he cannot share. It is a comedy about a bomb, yes, but underneath it is a surprisingly tender story about how the certainty of losing someone can suddenly reveal how much you would do for them, and how the friend you take for granted becomes precious the moment you think you are about to lose him. There is real feeling buried in that one, the kind that sneaks up on you. What I want you to take from this run of episodes, and this is the through line, is that the darkness is not a secret at all when you look at what actually aired. A crime thriller about hiding a body, a horror story where the lie comes true, a tender episode about believing your friend is going to die, and, at the far edge, an episode that depicted a suicide attempt and let the villain go free. These are not fan readings projected onto a bright surface. These are episodes the writers built dark on purpose, and they are scattered right through the golden early seasons that everyone remembers as pure fun. That is the crucial thing. The darkness is not a corruption that crept in later. It was there from the start, sitting beside the jellyfishing and the bubble blowing, because the people making it understood something that the theorists intuit and the casual viewer forgets, which is that comedy and dread are neighbors, and the same cartoon that can make you laugh the hardest is the one best equipped to unsettle you when it decides to. The theories we started with, the ones fans invented, are really just the audience picking up a signal that was really being sent. Now let me take you to the layer where the audience stopped picking up signals and started manufacturing them, which is the internet horror, the lost episode that never was. I need to be very clear before I say a single word about this next one, clearer than anywhere else tonight, because this is the place where people most often get confused. What I am about to describe is not a real episode. It was never made, never aired, never leaked, never existed as anything except a story that a person typed on the internet and other people passed around. It is fan fiction, a piece of horror writing, and nothing more. The reason I am spending time on it at all is that it is probably the single most famous piece of SpongeBob folklore there is, and understanding what it actually is, and what it is not, is the whole point. This is the tale usually called Squidward's Suicide, sometimes dressed up under the name Red Mist. The story presents itself as a memory. The narrator claims to be a former intern at the production company, and describes a day when the staff sat down to review what was supposedly the upcoming season premiere. The tape is labeled with an ordinary episode title, But when it plays, something is wrong. The animation is off. There is a strange, ugly audio underneath it, a sound the narrator describes as ghostly and grief-stricken. And Squidward is shown not as himself, but as something disturbed, his eyes red and bloodshot as if he has been crying blood, staring out of the screen. The story piles on the standard grammar of internet horror from there. Hyper-realistic frames that should not be in a cartoon, spliced in images the narrator claims were of real suffering, a growing sense that everyone in the room is watching something they were never meant to see, and it ends, as its title promises, with Squidward doing harm to himself. That is the legend. I am deliberately keeping the description restrained, and I want to tell you why. Part of the folklore around this story involves upsetting imagery, and I do not think dwelling on it serves you, especially not at this hour, especially not on a video meant to help you sleep. What serves you is understanding the thing itself. So here are the facts about the fiction. It was posted anonymously, around the 6th of April in 2010, to an image board, on a section devoted to the paranormal and the unexplained, which is precisely the sort of place where this genre lives and breeds. The genre has a name, creepypasta, which is just internet slang for these short shared horror stories, and this is among the best-known examples of it ever written. Later, someone expanded and rewrote the tale into a more elaborate version under the Red Mist name, and that rewrite even invented a fictional culprit, a made-up character sometimes given the name Andrew Skinner, presented as the deranged creator of the cursed tape. And I want to be completely plain about this, because people honestly get it wrong. Andrew Skinner is not a real animator. He is not a real person who worked on SpongeBob. He is a character invented inside a horror story, a fictional villain for a fictional tape. There was no cursed premiere. There was no traumatized intern. There is only a piece of writing and the long echo it left. Now here is the part I find fascinating, and it is why this story earns its place in a video about theories rather than being dismissed in a sentence. The creepypasta got so famous, so woven into the culture around SpongeBob, that the series itself eventually winked at it. In an episode from around 2019, there is a moment where SpongeBob is moving through a series of doors, and behind one of them, he encounters a version of Squidward that is unmistakably a nod to the legend, a Squidward with reddened, staring eyes, a brief flash of the creepypasta's most iconic image, dropped into the actual canon show as a knowing joke. It is quick and it is playful, and it was later edited out of some airings, but for a moment the official cartoon reached out and shook hands with the fan horror that had grown up in its shadow. I love that, honestly. It is the series acknowledging that it has a dark reflection out there on the internet, a haunted mirror image the fans built, and choosing to smile at it rather than pretend it does not exist. But do not let that wink confuse the registers, because this is exactly where people slip. A cartoon referencing the creepypasta does not make the creepypasta real, it makes it famous. A cursed lost episode of SpongeBob does not exist, and never existed. What exists is a very effective horror story, written anonymously in 2010, that tapped into something real about this cartoon. The same something we have been circling all night. The sense that behind the bright yellow surface, there might be something that could hurt you. The creepypasta did not discover a hidden darkness. It manufactured one, borrowing a beloved, trusted face and twisting it. Because there is no more effective horror than taking the thing that made you feel safe as a child and showing it to you with blood in its eyes. That is the whole trick. It works precisely because SpongeBob is supposed to be the safest thing in the world, and the story violates that safety. So hold this one in the clearest register of all. Not canon, not interpretation, not even really a theory. It is fiction about a cartoon, a ghost story the audience told itself, and the reason it spread like it did is the same reason all of tonight's theories spread. We cannot quite believe that something we loved that much is only what it appears to be. We keep looking for the shadow, and when we cannot find a real one, sometimes we build it ourselves, and we build it out of the face we trusted most. That instinct, to look for the shadow behind the friendly thing, is the engine under every reading we have covered, and it is about to drive us into the biggest theories of the whole night, the ones that do not settle for saying one character is sad or one burger is suspicious, but reach for the entire town and ask whether any of it is what it seems. The biggest theory of them all, the one that swallows most of the smaller ones, is the claim that Bikini Bottom is not a town at all, but an afterlife, that everyone we watch is already dead, and the ocean is where they went afterward. There are a few flavors of this, and I want to lay them out gently, because it is the kind of idea that sounds absurd for about 5 seconds and then, if you are tired and it is late, starts to feel uncomfortably tidy. The most popular version is the purgatory reading. It says the town is a place of waiting, a limbo, and that SpongeBob in particular is trapped in it, doomed to live the same essential day forever. Think about the actual shape of his life. He wakes up ecstatic. He goes to the same job. He flips the same burgers for the same greedy boss beside the same miserable coworker. He fails the same boating test, again. He comes home, he sleeps, and he wakes up ecstatic all over again, as if none of the previous day's disappointments left a mark. Nothing accumulates, nothing changes. He does not age, he does not advance, he does not escape, and crucially, he never stops being happy about it, no matter how many times the loop resets. And the purgatory reading takes that endless cheerful repetition and gives it a chilling explanation. He is so relentlessly happy because he has to be. He is somewhere between lives, serving a sentence of infinite Tuesdays, and his boundless joy is the only thing making an eternity of the same day survivable. Squidward, in this reading, is the one who half knows. He is the resident who can feel the loop, who senses that something is wrong with a world where nothing ever really moves, and whose despair is the correct response to a purgatory that SpongeBob is too bright to notice. The second flavor is stranger and more literal. It holds that the characters are the ghosts or spirits of the dead, human souls or otherwise, who took up residence in sea creature bodies, and that the whole undersea society is an afterworld built by and for the departed. And then there is a third, grimmer cottage industry attached to all this, the fan lists that assign each character a specific death, elaborate little stories about how SpongeBob supposedly died, how Patrick supposedly died, how each of them ended up down there. I want to be firm about those. They are pure fan invention, wild freewheeling fanon, with no basis in anything the writing has ever offered. They are people playing in the sandbox the theory built, and treating them as evidence for the theory is circular. Someone imagines a death for SpongeBob, and then someone else points to that imagined death as proof SpongeBob is dead. That is not how evidence works. Set those aside entirely. But the core purgatory reading, stripped of the fan fiction, does have something real underneath it, and I would be dishonest to pretend otherwise, because we have already walked past the foundations tonight. Remember the Flying Dutchman, the resident Grim Reaper, dragging souls down. E depois há a lenda de Davy Jones e o seu cacifo, que a série nunca chama de inferno em voz alta, mas que todos entendemos como destino reservado às almas condenadas do fundo do mar. Remember SB 129 and the White Void, where Squidward screamed alone into nothing. Remember that the characters do not age, that time does not seem to accumulate, that the same day resets endlessly without consequence. The theorists did not invent those elements. They were provided. A world with a functioning afterlife, a hell, a soul collector, a frozen relationship to time, and a hero locked in cheerful eternal repetition is, at minimum, a world you can read as an afterlife without straining very hard. And yet, and this is the honest counterweight, none of it actually confirms the theory, and some of it works against it. A world can contain ghosts and a hell without every living resident being dead, exactly as our own mythologies imagine ghosts and hells existing alongside the living. The Flying Dutchman being able to collect Mr. Krabs' soul only makes sense if Mr. Krabs is alive to lose it. You cannot drag a dead man to the afterlife. So the very machinery that supports the reading also faintly undercuts its strongest form. If everyone were already dead, the death machinery would have nothing to do. The more defensible version, then, is not that the town is literally the land of the dead, but that it is a world built right up against death, saturated with it, where the border between the living and the afterlife is thin and often crossed, which is a deeply unusual thing for a children's cartoon to be, and precisely the sort of thing you would expect from a creator who spent his life studying an ocean that is, in reality, the largest graveyard on the planet. That is where I land on the afterlife theories, and I find it more interesting than a simple yes or no. The literal everyone is dead version does not hold, because the world's own rules contradict it. But the feeling underneath it, the sense that this bright little town is unusually intimate with death, that its hero is trapped in a loop, that its saddest character can feel the walls of the world, that a soul collector patrols the edges, that is not a projection. That is the actual texture of the thing. The theorists overreached on the conclusion, but they were reading the room correctly. There is something about the changelessness of Bikini Bottom, the way it resets and never lets anyone grow old or move on, that feels less like a normal town and more like a place outside of ordinary time. And the more you sit with that changelessness, the more you start to wonder about it directly, which is a whole theory of its own. The question of why nobody down there ever ages, and what it means that they cannot. Let me take you there next. The characters of Bikini Bottom do not age. That is not a theory, that is just true, and it is true of most long-running cartoons, so on its own it is nothing. But SpongeBob does something specific with age that other shows do not. Something that keeps this from being a simple technical fact and turns it into a genuine puzzle, and the puzzle is this. The series cannot seem to decide, or refuses to decide, how old SpongeBob actually is, and it has left contradictory clues lying around for anyone who cares to find them. Here is the clearest one. He is a student at a boating school, learning to drive, failing his test with almost supernatural consistency. And at one point we get a look at his boating license, and it lists a birthday, the 14th of July 1986. Now if you take that at face value against the 1999 premiere, you get a SpongeBob who would be a young teenager, barely 13. But that cannot be right either, because SpongeBob lives entirely on his own, in a house he owns, holding down a full-time job as a fry cook, paying his own way, keeping a pet. Those are the responsibilities of an adult, so which is he? A kid learning to drive who somehow also owns a home and works full-time. An adult who is somehow still failing a beginner's boating test in his 30s. The contradiction never resolves, and the honest answer is that the creators deliberately wanted him to be timeless, unfixed, ageless in a way that lets the writing put him wherever a given story needs him. There is a real production history behind this ambiguity, and it grounds the whole thing. Hillenburg originally conceived of the main characters as adults, but somewhere in development the notion of SpongeBob as a boating school student took hold, which reads younger, more childlike, and the compromise that resulted is the strange creature we got, an adult who behaves like a delighted child, who has a mortgage and a job, and also the emotional life and enthusiasms of a small kid. That tension is not a mistake. It is the character. SpongeBob is deliberately built to be both at once, and that is a large part of why he is so beloved and so uncanny at the same time. He has an adult's independence and a child's soul, and you are never asked to choose. The theorists take this ambiguity and run in two directions with it. One direction says the characters are secretly all children, that the whole thing is really about kids and the adult trappings are a thin disguise, and that reading got a strange boost years later when a prequel spin-off arrived, called Camp Coral, which actually depicts the main cast as children at a summer camp. Now, let me be precise about what that does and does not prove. A modern prequel choosing to show them as kids does not retroactively reveal that they were secretly kids all along in the original series. It is a later creative decision by a different team, a separate interpretation of the characters, not a hidden truth uncovered. But it does show that the childlike reading was always available in the material, available enough that the franchise itself eventually leaned into it and built a whole series on it. The seed was really there. The other direction the theorists run, and this one loops us right back to where we just were, is the timeless and trapped reading. The idea that the reason nobody ages is that Bikini Bottom exists outside of ordinary time, that the residents are frozen in an eternal present where the calendar does not really function. And you can see how that hooks straight into the purgatory idea from a moment ago, the endless resetting day, the hero who never grows old and never moves on. The no-aging fact becomes the physical symptom of the metaphysical condition. They do not age because time does not pass there, and time does not pass there because it is not a normal place in a normal world. Here is where I come down, and I think it is the calm and correct place. The lack of aging is mostly a practical fact of cartoon production, shared by nearly every animated show, and the contradictory age clues are mostly the residue of a deliberate design choice to keep SpongeBob timeless and unpinnable. There is no secret in the boating license. It is a gag and a loose end, not a coded confession. But, and this is the interesting part I do not want to lose, the choice to make him timeless has real consequences for how the whole world feels, and those consequences are what the theorists are actually responding to. A town where no one ages, where nothing accumulates, where the same student fails the same test forever, and the same fry cook flips the same burger forever, and everyone wakes up each morning with a clean slate and no scars, does start to feel, if you look at it a certain way, less like a place people live, and more like a place people are kept. The ambiguity that started as a practical compromise ends up gently serving every darker reading in the video, because timelessness, when you stare at it long enough, stops feeling like a blessing and starts feeling like a sentence. The creators wanted him unpinnable so the stories could go anywhere. The side effect is a world that feels, ever so slightly, like it is holding its breath and never letting it out. That unchanging quality, that refusal of time and consequence, is also the thing that lets the writers run one particular character into the ground for our amusement, without ever letting him escape. And he is the one I have been promising to come back to, the crab at the center of the money. Because there is a reading of Mr. Krabs that has nothing to do with cannibalism and everything to do with the real world, and it is, for my money, the most disturbing thing in this entire video. Let me tell you about the crab and his money. Most of the theories tonight ask you to imagine something the writers are hiding. This one asks you to look directly at something they put right on the surface, in plain sight, every single episode, and simply to take it seriously instead of laughing it off. Because when you stop laughing at Mr. Krabs and start actually watching what he does, he is one of the more troubling figures in children's television, and unlike the cannibal theory, this reading does not require inventing a single thing. It just requires believing your own eyes. Mr. Krabs loves money. That is his one joke, the engine of 1,000 gags, his eyes turning into dollar signs, his obsessive counting of coins, his willingness to bend himself into any shape for a nickel. And it is funny, it is played for laughs, and it works. But underneath the comedy is a portrait, and the portrait is of a very specific kind of person. The person for whom accumulation is the entire meaning of life. Look at how he actually behaves once you strip away the cartoon lighting. He hoards wealth he never enjoys and never spends. Money that does nothing for him, except exist in a pile he can guard. He underpays his employees, notoriously, working SpongeBob and Squidward brutal hours for almost nothing, extracting the maximum labor for the minimum coin. He keeps the restaurant open around the clock when he thinks he can squeeze more out of it, indifferent to what those overnight shifts cost the people working them. He values his fortune above nearly everything, and the writing has been willing, more than once, to suggest he values it above the well-being of his own daughter, Pearl. This is not a subtle character. He is exploitation drawn as a crab, and the comedy plays the exploitation for laughs because the alternative is to look at it straight, and looking at it straight is uncomfortable. This reading is not just fan chatter, and that is what separates it from most of what we have covered. Actual academics, people writing serious analysis, have read SpongeBob as a critique of capitalism, and they point at Mr. Krabs as the embodiment of it. There are readings of specific episodes through a Marxist lens, treating the Krusty Krab as a little machine for turning a worker's joy and labor into a boss's private hoard. In that reading, SpongeBob's relentless happiness at his terrible job is not innocent at all. It is the perfect worker's consciousness, the employee so thoroughly identified with the company that he experiences his own exploitation as bliss, who would be devastated to be given a raise or a day off because the work is his whole self. Squidward, in the same frame, is the worker who sees the trap clearly, who knows he is being used and knows his labor is stolen and hates every minute of it, and whose misery is simply the honest response to conditions that SpongeBob is too happy to notice. Between the two of them, you get the whole picture of what work does to people, the one broken by seeing it and the one saved from despair only by refusing to. I want to mark the register carefully, because this is an interpretation and not a stated intention. There is no confirmation that Hillenburg or his writers sat down to make an anti-capitalist parable. It is entirely possible, likely even, that Mr. Krabs began as nothing more than a funny, greedy crab, a simple comic type as old as storytelling. So I am not going to tell you the series is secretly a Marxist tract, because I do not know that, and neither does anyone else. But here is what makes this reading stronger than the drug map or the sins map, and why it unsettles me more than anything else tonight. It does not require you to distort anything. Every piece of it is literally on screen. The hoarding is on screen. The underpayment is on screen. The all-night shifts are on screen. The choosing of money over his daughter is on screen. You do not have to squint or invent or stretch. You only have to decline the invitation to laugh. And once you decline it, A truly bleak picture of a small economy, built on one creature's greed, assembles itself out of footage that millions of children have watched and adored. The darkness is not hidden behind the comedy. The comedy is the disguise the darkness wears, in broad daylight, so that you will find it charming instead of horrifying. And here is the part that gets me, the thing I keep turning over. Of all the characters, Mr. Krabs is the one whose darkness is handled most honestly, and it is the one nobody theorizes about, because it is not mysterious. There is no secret to uncover, no code to crack, no lost episode to find. He is just openly what he is, an exploiter, cheerfully robbing the people who love him, and the culture around SpongeBob spends its energy inventing elaborate hidden horrors about nuclear mutation and cannibalism, while walking right past the actual villainy sitting at the cash register in every episode. That is the real trick of Mr. Krabs. He hides in plain sight by being funny. The theories chase shadows in the corners, while the troubling thing stands center stage, grinning, counting its money, and we love it. If you want a disturbing SpongeBob reading that will actually stay with you, it is not the creepypasta, and it is not the crab meat. It is that the most beloved comedy of a generation asked you to find exploitation adorable, and you did, and so did I. Now let me turn from the boss to the villain across the street, because there is a sadness in the chum bucket worth pausing on. Plankton is the villain, and like a lot of the best villains, he is funnier and sadder than the hero. And there is a whole quiet tragedy in him that the theories tend to overlook because he is small and green and easy to laugh at. Let me start with the smallness, because even that carries a correction people get wrong. Plankton is named for real plankton, and specifically he is drawn as a copepod, which is a genuine microscopic drifting creature, and he is indeed one of the smallest characters around, so small that his size is a running joke, an entire personality built around being physically insignificant in a world of larger creatures. But he is not the smallest thing in Bikini Bottom, which people often assume. He keeps a pet, an amoeba named Spot, and an amoeba is smaller still, a single-celled speck. So even the tiny tyrant has something tinier that loves him, which is a small and strange and rather touching detail once you notice it. Now the sadness. Plankton runs a restaurant, the Chum Bucket, directly across the street from the Krusty Krab, and he never, ever succeeds. That is the fixed fact of his existence. He schemes and he fails. He schemes and he fails, endlessly. And the writing finds his failure funny, which it is. But look at the shape of the life. He owns a restaurant that no one comes to. We talked earlier about why. The chum is meat, entirely made of ground dead fish, and the town's creatures largely want the meatless patty instead. So the Chum Bucket is not just unpopular by bad luck. It is selling exactly the wrong thing to exactly the wrong customers, doomed by the biology of its own clientele. Plankton stands in an empty restaurant, day after day, watching a line form across the street for a competitor who beat him, consumed by an envy that has become his entire self. That is the Sins reading, envy. And it is the label that fits its character most cleanly. But read as a life, rather than a label, it is really bleak. He is a creature defined entirely by wanting what someone else has, and never once getting it. And then there is Karen. Karen is Plankton's wife, and she is a computer, a machine he built himself, sometimes a screen on the wall of the Chum Bucket, sometimes mobile, and she is his partner in every sense, his confidant, his co-conspirator, the voice that helps him scheme, and the voice that mocks him when the scheme inevitably collapses. There is something poignant in that pairing that mostly gets played for laughs but occasionally lets a little air in. Here is the smallest creature in the town, a failure by every external measure, running an empty restaurant, despised by his rival, mocked by the world, and he has built himself a wife out of a machine so that he will not be alone in it. The two of them, the microscopic reject and the computer he assembled to love, holding down an empty business together across the street from everyone else's success, is honestly one of the more melancholy little arrangements anywhere in the cartoon if you let yourself see it that way. Their bickering is the bickering of a long marriage. Their schemes are the shared projects of two people who only really have each other. The dark theories tend to skip Plankton, and I think it is because he does not need one. There is no hidden horror to uncover about him because his tragedy is entirely on the surface, exactly like Mr. Krabs' villainy. He is a small, bitter, lonely creature, married to a computer, running a failing business, fueled by pure envy, and you are asked to laugh at all of it, and you do, because it is funny, and that laughter is the same trick we keep finding tonight. The comedy is doing the work of making something sad feel light. When One Course Meal, the episode we talked about, pushed Plankton to that terrible place in the road, part of why it landed so wrong with people is that it took this fundamentally pathetic, sympathetic little failure and tortured him past the point where laughter could hold, and suddenly, the sadness that is always sitting just under his character was exposed with nothing over it. The writing usually keeps that sadness covered. That one time it pulled the cover off, and everyone recoiled, because they had been laughing at an honestly wretched little life the whole time without letting themselves feel it. So the honest reading of Plankton is not a theory at all, it is just attention. He is what happens when you take the funniest character and ask what his day actually feels like from the inside. It feels like wanting one thing your whole life, watching someone else have it, failing to take it every single time, and going home to a computer who is the only one who understands. There is no nuclear mutation in that, no cannibalism, no lost episode. There is just a small green creature and his amoeba and his computer wife in an empty restaurant, and it is, if you look at it in the right light and at the right hour, deeply sad. And from the smallest character, let me turn to the one who is arguably the one to fear most, which is not who you would guess, because there is a dark reading of Patrick that the writing softly earns. Patrick Star is the lovable idiot, the best friend, the pink starfish who lives under a rock and thinks with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever and the reasoning power of the rock he lives under. He is beloved for exactly that, for being simple and warm and dumb, in a way that is comforting, the friend who will never judge you because he cannot really follow what you are doing. But there is a theory about Patrick, and it is one of the more persuasive dark character readings, that says his stupidity is not harmless at all, that Patrick is, in effect, one of the cruelest and most damaging figures in the whole cast, and that the writing lets him get away with it precisely because we have all agreed he is too dim to be held responsible. Look at what Patrick actually does across the series, once you stop grading him on the curve of his stupidity. He is casually, breathtakingly selfish. He turns on his friends the moment it is convenient. He is capable of real malice, jealousy, and spite, and he expresses them without the filter that a smarter character would have to hide behind. When Patrick wants something, he takes it. When Patrick is jealous, he lashes out. When Patrick is bored, other people get hurt. And because he does all of this with a big blank happy face, we read it as innocence, as the harmless flailing of a creature who does not know better. But the theory asks a sharp question. What if he does know better, at least well enough? What if the stupidity is partly a permission structure, a way for the character, and for the cartoon, to do deeply cruel things and have the audience laugh instead of recoil? Because surely Patrick did not mean it. He is too dumb to mean it, except he keeps doing it, and it keeps working out for him, and the people around him keep absorbing the damage. There is a version of this reading that goes further, and I find it unsettling, and it connects to something real about how he is treated. Of all the main characters, Patrick is the one who faces the fewest consequences for the harm he causes. Mr. Krabs occasionally gets his comeuppance. Squidward suffers constantly. Plankton fails every time. But Patrick, again and again, does something thoughtless or selfish or destructive and simply floats away from it, unbothered, unpunished, back to his rock, because who could stay mad at Patrick? And if you have ever known a person like that in real life, a person who uses an appearance of harmlessness, of not being sharp enough to be responsible, as a shield, to behave however they like, while everyone around them cleans up the mess and makes excuses, then this reading of Patrick lands with a specific, uncomfortable weight. He is the friend whose obliviousness is a kind of armor, who gets to be cruel for free because he has convinced everyone, maybe including himself, that he cannot help it. Now I want to keep my footing here, because this is interpretation, and I will not pretend otherwise. There is no reveal that Patrick is secretly a calculating menace. The straightforward reading, the intended one almost certainly, is that Patrick is simply a good-hearted idiot who occasionally, like everyone, behaves badly, and whose lack of intelligence is played for warmth and comedy rather than horror. Most of the time Patrick is sweet, a loyal friend who loves SpongeBob without condition, and it would be a distortion to paint the whole character as a villain. So hold the dark Patrick reading as what it is, a lens, one that becomes available only if you stack up his worst moments and ignore his best ones, which is exactly the trick every dark character theory pulls. But here is why I think it is worth keeping even so, and why it is more than just a fun inversion. The Patrick reading points at something true not about the character but about us, about how we assign blame, about how willing we are to forgive cruelty when it comes wrapped in a harmless enough package. A whole audience was trained to laugh at things Patrick does that would be truly hurtful if a sharper character did them, and we laughed because he is dumb and pink and we love him. And that reflex, the reflex to excuse the harm because we find the person harmless, is a real and slightly troubling thing about human beings that the cartoon accidentally exposes. The Dark Patrick theory is not really claiming the starfish is evil. It is noticing that we will forgive almost anything from someone we have decided is too innocent to blame. And that is a disturbing thing to notice about ourselves. More disturbing, honestly, than any nuclear reading. So that is Patrick, the harmless one who might do more damage than any of them, protected by the very quality we love him for. And having gone through the smallest character and the dumbest, I want to turn to the strangest fit of all in Bikini Bottom, the one who does not even breathe the same water as everyone we have discussed, because the questions around Sandy get darker the longer you hold them. Sandy Cheeks is a squirrel, a land squirrel, an air-breathing mammal, living on the ocean floor among fish and mollusks and crustaceans, and the series is completely upfront about how strange that is. She cannot breathe the water. She lives inside a sealed dome full of air, a little bubble of dry land under the sea, and whenever she leaves it she has to wear a suit and a helmet filled with air to survive, and whenever any of the sea creatures come to visit her, they have to wear helmets filled with water to survive the air. She is the one character for whom the ocean is actively hostile, a place that would kill her in minutes if her equipment failed, and that fact, once you really register it, casts a slightly lonely light over her whole existence. Everyone she loves lives in an environment that is lethal to her. She is permanently a guest in a world she can never fully belong to, sealed off inside her own supply of air, a visitor who can never take the helmet off. The theorists do a couple of things with Sandy, and the lighter one first. In the drug map we walked through earlier, Sandy is the sober one, the clean and clear-headed outsider, annoyed by everyone else's behavior, and I mention it again only to note how neatly her actual situation feeds that reading. She is literally the one operating on different air than everyone around her, the one who sees the town from the outside because she is, physiologically, from the outside. She is a scientist, rational, capable, a little exasperated by the chaos, and it is easy to project onto her the role of the one sane person in a mad world, the outsider who can see clearly, precisely because she is not fully soaked in whatever the others are soaked in. But the darker thread, and the one that fits tonight, is about isolation, and it connects to the nuclear reading in a way I find really eerie. Think back to where we started, to the idea, now more or less acknowledged by the writers themselves, that Bikini Bottom is what you would get from atomic testing at Bikini Atoll, a town of sea creatures warped into strange new life by radiation. If you take that seriously, Sandy sits in a very strange position within it. She is the one resident who is unambiguously a normal land animal, a squirrel who came down from the surface, from the ordinary world, into this warped undersea society, and who has to wrap herself in air and glass to survive among its inhabitants. She is the visitor from the untransformed world, living inside a bubble in the transformed one, and there is something subtly unsettling in that image. The ordinary creature sealed in her little pocket of normal air, surrounded on all sides by a world that would drown her, keeping company with beings that the ocean itself made possible and would unmake her for. She loves them. She has built a whole life among them, but she can never breathe what they breathe, and they can never breathe what she breathes, and that gap never closes, not for a single episode. I do not think there is a hidden theory to crack here, in the sense of a secret being kept. Sandy's oddness is right on the surface, declared openly, treated as a fun premise rather than a mystery. But I wanted to sit with her because she is a beautiful illustration of the thing this whole video keeps circling. You can take the cheeriest possible premise, a can-do squirrel scientist who does karate and loves her friends, and simply by looking at it a little too closely and a little too long, at the wrong hour of the night, you can find the loneliness underneath it. She is never not in danger. She is never fully home. She is loved by a world that cannot share her air, that is not darkness anyone hid, It is darkness built into the very design of the character, and then left there, unremarked, because if you dwell on it, the fun curdles into something more poignant, the way so much of Bikini Bottom does when you stop laughing and start looking. And that impulse, the impulse to look too closely and find the seam where the fun turns strange, reaches its strangest possible destination in one particular episode, an episode about a magic pencil, where the cartoon accidentally opened a door to a question it could not close, the question of what it means for a drawing to be alive, and whether anyone down there, including the little yellow sponge himself, is anything more than a picture somebody made. Let me tell you about the pencil. There is an episode from the second season called Frankendoodle, and it is a comedy, a light and silly one, but it happens to establish a rule about the world that has kept fans up at night ever since. The setup is this. Somewhere far above Bikini Bottom, up on the surface, a human artist is out on a boat sketching, and he drops his pencil into the sea. But this is no ordinary pencil. It is enormous, the size of a telephone pole to the tiny creatures below, and it turns out to be magic. Whatever you draw with it becomes real. SpongeBob finds it, and he starts drawing, and eventually he sketches a crude, mean-spirited version of himself, a badly drawn doodle of a sponge, and that drawing comes to life. It calls itself, in its garbled, drawn voice, Mihoy Minoy, and it becomes the villain of the episode, a living scribble named Doodlebob who runs amok, a creature made purely of pencil marks that can think and move and want things. On its surface, it is a fun Monster of the Week story, and it resolves the way those do. But look at what it establishes as a law of this universe. Inside the fiction of SpongeBob, a drawing can be alive. A thing made of nothing but pencil lines on a surface can wake up, become conscious, have desires and fears, and a will of its own. The episode does not treat this as impossible or even especially remarkable. It just happens, and the world absorbs it. And once a story has told you that drawings can live, a certain question becomes almost impossible not to ask, and the fans asked it immediately. If a drawing can be alive in this world, and SpongeBob lives in this world, then what exactly is SpongeBob? He is, after all, himself a drawing. Everyone down there is. They are all lines and colors on a surface, animated into apparent life. The episode holds up a mirror to the entire cartoon, and seems to ask whether there is any real difference between Doodlebob, the drawing that came to life, and SpongeBob, the drawing we have been watching come to life for a quarter of a century. Now I have to be careful and precise here, because this is exactly the sort of place where a theory overreaches, and I promised you honesty every time. The episode does not say that SpongeBob is a drawing in the way Doodlebob is. It never claims that SpongeBob was sketched into being by some artist, or that he is aware of being a cartoon, or that his reality is any less solid than anyone else's in his world. That extrapolation, the leap from drawings can live to therefore SpongeBob himself is just a drawing who does not know it, is speculation, a thought the episode invites but does not confirm. So I will not tell you the cartoon revealed SpongeBob to be a self-aware doodle. It did not. What it did was faintly install a rule: drawings can become real. That turns the whole thing into a slightly vertiginous object if you think about it too hard. Because we, the audience, are watching drawings that have, in every way that matters to us, come to life. The line between Doodlebob and the rest of the cast is a line the episode draws our attention to and then, wisely, walks away from. There is a real-world layer to this that makes it richer, and it ties back to where we began the whole night. The pencil comes from a human artist on the surface. The magic that creates life in Bikini Bottom, in this one episode, originates in the hand of a person drawing, and it is hard not to see, in that, a soft and probably unintentional echo of the actual situation, a human artist, a pencil, a world of sea creatures brought to life on a surface by someone's hand. Stephen Hillenburg was, quite literally, the artist whose drawing became this living world. Frankendoodle stages a tiny version of its own creation myth without ever meaning to. A human, up above, dropping a pencil into the sea, and, by accident, making something down there wake up and talk. I do not think the episode intended that reading, but it is right there, and it is lovely and a little uncanny. A cartoon accidentally dramatizing the fact of its own drawn existence. Where this lands, for me, is not on any grand claim that SpongeBob is secretly a self-aware drawing trapped in a fictional prison, because there is no real reason to believe that, and I would rather tell you the truth than a spookier story. Where it lands is on a gentler and stranger note. Frankendoodle is the moment the writing came closest to acknowledging what it is, a world of living drawings, without ever quite saying it, and it is the closest the disturbing theories get to touching something philosophical rather than merely dark. It is not about death or nuclear fallout or exploitation. It is about the thin, dizzy line between a picture and a person, between a thing that is drawn and a thing that is alive, and about how a children's cartoon, of all things, briefly stood right on top of that line, looked down, and then hopped off before anyone got hurt. And the character who ends up carrying most of the weight of these existential readings, the drawing whose living has become a kind of imprisonment, is not SpongeBob at all. It is the pet nobody worries about, the little snail crawling through the background of every episode. So let me finally talk about Gary. Gary is SpongeBob's pet snail, and the first thing to understand about Gary, the thing that is honestly a little strange once you notice it, is that he is a snail who is treated in every way like a cat. He meows. He is kept as a house pet, fed from a dish, cared for and cooed over, and scolded exactly like a cat, and the writing never once acknowledges the oddness of a sea snail behaving like a domestic feline. In a town of talking, walking, employed sea creatures, Gary occupies a lower rung, the rung of pet, a creature that lives among people, but is not quite one of them, that understands more than he lets on, but exists mostly as background, crawling slowly through the corner of the frame, while the real characters live their lives. The dark theory about Gary is that he is neglected, even abused, and I want to handle this one gently and honestly, because it is almost entirely fanon, and it deserves to be named as such. There is no canon confirmation that Gary is mistreated. SpongeBob, by every ordinary measure we are given, loves Gary deeply, dotes on him, panics when he is sick, treats him as family. So the theory is not built on the text saying Gary is abused. It is built on a couple of moments and a lot of projection. And the central moment, the one everybody remembers, is real and sad. There is an episode in which SpongeBob, distracted, simply forgets to feed Gary, and Gary, hungry and hurt and feeling unloved, leaves. He runs away from home, and the episode gives this a mournful little song, a soft and pleading tune calling for Gary to come home, and it is, for a silly cartoon about a sponge, a surprisingly effective piece of heartbreak. Grown adults remember that song. Grown adults get a little quiet when it comes up. It found a real ache in people, the specific ache of having let down something that depended on you, or of being the small thing that got forgotten. But notice what that episode actually is, because it matters for the register. It is not a story that reveals Gary is chronically abused. It is a story about a single lapse and its consequences, and about how much SpongeBob regrets it, and how hard he works to get Gary back. The emotional power of it comes precisely from the fact that SpongeBob is not a neglectful owner, that this was a failure by someone who deeply loves his pet, which is exactly why it stings. The theory that Gary is systematically neglected takes that one tender episode and inflates it into a pattern the series never depicts. So I will say it plainly. Gary being abused is fan speculation, not canon, and it runs against the grain of nearly everything actually on screen, which is a pet who is loved, sometimes imperfectly, by an owner who would fall apart without him. Where the Gary readings do touch something real, though, is in that lower rung I mentioned, the strange in-between status of being a creature who lives among people, but is not counted as one. Gary is smart. There are hints, again and again, that Gary understands far more than he is given credit for, that behind those slow eyes is a mind gently watching the household's chaos with something like patient wisdom. And there is a melancholy in that, if you sit with it, the idea of an intelligent being spending its whole existence as a pet, understanding everything, able to express almost nothing, sliding slowly across the floor of someone else's life, that is not abuse. It is something quieter and sadder, the loneliness of the creature who sees clearly and cannot speak, and the cartoon plays it, mostly, for gentle comedy, the wise snail rolling his eyes at his oblivious owner. But at the right hour it reads as its own small tragedy, the mind trapped in the pet, present for everything, party to nothing. So Gary, in the end, is a good illustration of how these theories work at their worst and at their best. At their worst, they take a loving relationship and a single sad episode and spin them into a horror of systematic abuse that never happened, and that version you should set down. At their best, they notice something true and gentle, the odd pathos of a clever creature living a whole life as a beloved but voiceless pet. And that version is worth keeping, not as a dark secret but as a quiet grace note in a cartoon full of them. Gary is not a victim. Gary is just the quiet one in the corner who understands more than he can say, and there is a soft sadness in that which does not need a theory to earn it. And now, having spent all this time on what is hidden and what fans imagine, let me turn to a handful of things that are simply, verifiably true about these characters. True and strange enough that learning them has ruined more than a few childhoods, starting with the fact that Squidward is not who you think he is. Squidward Tentacles is not a squid, he is an octopus. This is canon, stated plainly, and it undoes a small part of childhood for almost everyone who learns it, because his very name has the word squid buried inside it, and you spend years assuming the name is a description. It is not. He is an octopus. The writing has always known he is an octopus, and the squid in his name is essentially a joke on you. The reason comes down to sound, and it is one of those production facts that is funnier and more human than any theory. Hillenburg reportedly felt that Squidward simply sounded funnier than the alternatives, that a name like Octoward or Octoboy did not land the way Squidward did. So the character stayed an octopus but took the name of a squid, purely because the wrong word was the funnier word, and comedy beat accuracy, as it usually should. And once you are looking at Squidward as an octopus, the next thing snaps into view, and cannot unsnap. Count his legs. An octopus, in the real world, has 8. Squidward has 6. He walks around on 6 tentacles, not 8, and he has for the entire run, and almost nobody notices until it is pointed out, at which point they can never not see it. The reason, again, is beautifully mundane. 6 was easier to animate than 8. 2 fewer limbs to draw and move and keep track of in every frame, across hundreds of episodes, adds up to an enormous saving of effort, and so Squidward lost 2 legs to the practical demands of animation, and no one was ever told. There are, apparently, a small number of moments across the years where he briefly appears with the full 8. Little slips or exceptions, but his standard, everyday design is a 6-legged octopus named after a squid, which is, when you write it out like that, a strange thing to have at the center of the biggest cartoon of its era. I love these facts, honestly, more than most of the theories, and I want to tell you why. Because it connects to the whole spirit of the night. The dark theories are all about hidden intention, the belief that a show is secretly encoding something sinister, a drug map, a death, a nuclear parable, a coded confession. But these little truths about Squidward point in the opposite direction, toward how the cartoon was actually made, which is by tired artists making practical choices and funny people picking the funnier word. Squidward is an octopus, because octopus was the right animal, and squid was the funnier sound. He has 6 legs because 6 was cheaper to draw than 8. There is no conspiracy in it, no hidden meaning, just the ordinary, slightly magical process of a bunch of people building a world under deadline and making 1,000 small calls that hardened, over the years, into canon that now feels profound. The strangeness is real. The intention behind it is completely innocent, and I think that gap between how strange the result is and how mundane the reason is one of the more reassuring things you can learn about SpongeBob, because it is a reminder that not every odd detail is a clue. Sometimes an octopus has 6 legs because animation is hard. That same lesson applies to a whole shelf of childhood-ruining facts that float around this cartoon, the small true things that feel like they must mean something and mostly just mean that the world is odd. The town sits beneath a real nuclear test site, which we have covered, and that one does mean something. But most of the others are like the 6 legs, strange surfaces with ordinary depths. The names, the designs, the little inconsistencies that fans treat as breadcrumbs are, more often than not, just the fingerprints of the people who made it. Choices made for sound, or for speed, or for a laugh, not for a secret. Learning them does something funny to you. It ruins the smooth childhood surface a little, the sense that everything about the cartoon was inevitable and meant, and it replaces that surface with something better, in my opinion, which is the texture of a made thing, a world you can see the hands on. So hold the octopus, and hold the 6 legs, as a kind of gentle correction to the theorizing instinct. Yes, the world is full of strangeness, and yes, some of that strangeness runs dark, and we have spent the whole night honoring the parts that do. But a lot of the odd details that feel most loaded, most like they must be hiding something, are hiding nothing at all except the reality that a cartoon is a handmade object full of small human compromises. And there is one more character whose oddness is neither a dark secret nor a mere production quirk, but something rarer and softly moving. A character allowed, almost uniquely, to actually grow old in front of us. And what SpongeBob does with age, real age, the kind that does not reset, is worth sitting with before we start to wind down. I mean the old superheroes, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are a pair of superheroes, a parody of the caped crime fighters of old comic books and television, and they are SpongeBob and Patrick's greatest heroes, the idols they grew up watching. But here is the twist built into them, and it is truly one of the more melancholy running ideas in the series. These heroes are old, not middle-aged, old, elderly, long retired, living out their days in a retirement home by the sea. Mermaid Man is a doddering, forgetful old man who can barely remember his own catchphrases, who drifts in and out of lucidity, whose glory days are decades behind him. And Barnacle Boy, his loyal sidekick, is himself an old man, gray and wrinkled and stooped, and yet he is still called Boy, still treated as the junior partner, still the sidekick, at an age when he should long ago have been his own hero. That detail alone, an elderly man permanently stuck in the role of the boy, the sidekick who never got to grow up in the eyes of the world even as his body grew old, is one of the sharpest small sadnesses ever put on screen here, and it is played, mostly, for laughs. What makes the pair matter for a video about this cartoon's darkness is that they are the one place it lets real aging in. We spent time earlier on how nobody in Bikini Bottom ages, how the town seems frozen outside of time, how that changelessness feeds every purgatory and afterlife reading. These two are the exception, and the exception proves how deliberately the rest of the world avoids the subject. Here, and almost only here, the writing looks directly at what time does to a person. It shows you heroes who were once mighty and are now frail. It shows you the indignity of a sharp mind going soft, the confusion, the forgetfulness, the way a legend can dwindle into a confused old man who needs help finding his own boots. And it shows you the quieter cruelty of a life spent as someone else's sidekick, ending in old age still defined by that subordinate role, still called boy. The partnership curdled over the decades into something that looks a lot like resentment simmering under duty. There is real feeling in that, if you let yourself find it, and it connects to the man who made it in a way I find almost unbearably poignant now. Stephen Hillenburg built a world where no one had to age, a bright, changeless ocean where his characters could stay young and delighted forever. And then, in this one corner, he let age in on purpose and looked at it clearly, the forgetting, the frailty, the diminishment. And Hillenburg himself, years later, would face a disease that takes exactly those things, that steals the body's strength, and, in its own cruel way, forces a person to confront the end of their powers. I will not pretend the old superheroes were a prophecy, because they were not. They were a comic parody, written long before he was ill, and I will not turn a real man's illness into a fan theory. But there is something moving, in hindsight, about the fact that the gentlest and most honest look at aging and decline in his whole cheerful, ageless world was aimed at a pair of retired heroes, and that the man who drew them would come to know that territory himself. It is not a hidden message. It is just a coincidence with weight, the kind that history sometimes lays over a piece of art after the fact. So these two old heroes are the crack in the changeless world through which real time gets in, and they are worth remembering as we start to wind down, because they answer, in their small way, the biggest theory of the night. If you want to know whether Bikini Bottom is truly a timeless purgatory where no one ever ages or declines or moves toward an end, the honest answer is no, because right here, in the retirement home by the sea, two old heroes are aging and declining and being forgotten in real time, forgetting themselves, growing frail, quarreling over decades of accumulated hurt. Time does reach Bikini Bottom. It just mostly stays in the retirement home, out at the edge of town, where the writing keeps the one thing its bright, changeless heart cannot fully look at. And with those two old men in mind, the mighty grown frail, let me begin to bring all of this together, and to sort, as gently as I can, what we actually know from what we only imagined. Before we do that sorting, though, there are two more figures I do not want to leave out. because their darkness is the ordinary, grinding kind that is easy to miss. And the first is a character who spends the entire series being punished for a crime she did not commit. Mrs. Puff is SpongeBob's boating teacher, the long-suffering fish who runs the driving school, and her life, when you actually look at it, is a slow-motion catastrophe with SpongeBob at the center of it. Because SpongeBob cannot drive, he never learns. Episode after episode, year after year, he climbs behind the wheel, and something goes catastrophically wrong. The boat crashes, the town is endangered, property is destroyed, and Mrs. Puff, the person legally and professionally responsible for him, absorbs the consequences, again and again and again. She has watched her vehicle demolished more times than any person could count. She has, in the run of the series, actually ended up in jail as a result of the chaos he causes. Her whole existence, as it has been framed, is being trapped in a professional relationship with a student who will never, ever pass, and who leaves a trail of wreckage through her life that she cannot escape because it is her job to keep letting him try. The fan reading assigns her post-traumatic stress, and honestly, of all the mental illness readings we walked through earlier, this is the one where the writing has done most of the work itself, because it repeatedly plays her nervous, braced, flinching reactions to SpongeBob for comedy. She has learned to expect disaster from a particular direction, and her body responds before her mind can, which is, played straight, exactly what living under chronic unpredictable catastrophe does to a person. But I want to stay careful, as I have all night, and say clearly that this is interpretation, not a diagnosis the writers confirm. What is right there in the text is the trap. Mrs. Puff is a woman whose life has been organized, against her will, around an agent of chaos she cannot get away from, and there is a genuine quiet horror in the repetition of it. The sense that she is serving a sentence with no end date, condemned to hand the keys to the same boy and brace for the same crash for as long as the series runs. In a town where no one ages and nothing changes, her particular changelessness is a punishment, an endless loop of destruction and paperwork and dread. And there was even, notoriously, an episode that let her briefly, darkly fantasize about being free of him by any means necessary, a flicker of how far a person can be pushed by an inescapable, repeating misery. She is the purgatory theory made personal. She is one resident's actual eternal Tuesday, and hers is spent watching a boat come apart around a boy who will never learn. The second figure I do not want to skip is Pearl, and Pearl is a mystery that has simply never been explained, sitting in plain sight the whole time. Pearl is Mr. Krabs' daughter. She is a teenage girl, moody and social and normal in the way teenagers are, and she is a whale, an enormous young whale, the daughter of a small red crab, and the series has never seriously accounted for how that is possible. There is no mother in the picture, no explanation of what happened to Mrs. Krabs, no story of how a crab came to have a whale for a child. The absence is total and permanent. Pearl simply is his daughter, a whale to his crab, and you are asked not to think about it, and mostly you do not, because you are 6, or because you are charmed, or because the episode moves too fast to dwell. But sit with it, and it gets strange, and a little sad, in the way so much of this does. Where is Pearl's mother? There is no answer. Fans have filled that silence with theories, some tender and some grim, and I will not dignify the grimmest of them, the ones that reach back toward the cannibalism reading and imagine dark fates, because those are pure fanon with nothing under them, and I told you at the start I would not narrate a theory as if it happened. What is real, what is actually on the screen, is a father and daughter of two completely different species, one of them absent a mother the series refuses to discuss, and a relationship in which, more than once, the writing has let Mr. Krabs value his money over Pearl's happiness, which is its own quiet cruelty. The mystery of Pearl is not a hidden horror waiting to be cracked. It is an unanswered question left deliberately unanswered, a small, permanent strangeness at the center of the Krabs household, a whale child and her crab father, and the mother nobody will mention. And the honest thing to say about it is that we do not know, that the writers chose never to tell us, and that the not knowing is, in the end, more haunting than any answer a fan could invent. Now, with all these threads laid out, let me finally sort them. Actually, before I sort, there is one more layer I have to show you, because it is the strangest of all and it comes from inside the cartoon, not from any fan. In its special episodes, its holiday specials and anniversary episodes, SpongeBob has a recurring framing device, and once you notice what it implies, it subtly rearranges everything. The device is a live-action human pirate named Patchy, Patchy the Pirate, a real person filmed in a real living room in what is presented as the real, dry human world. And Patchy is the president of the SpongeBob fan club. In these segments, SpongeBob is not real. SpongeBob is a cartoon, a television program, and Patchy is a superfan of it, a slightly pathetic grown man obsessed with a children's show, waiting by his television for the next episode, writing to his hero, living for a cartoon. Sit with what that does to the whole structure. Within the official canon of SpongeBob SquarePants, there exists a real world, our world, a human world up on the dry surface, in which SpongeBob SquarePants is a fictional television program that people watch. The series contains, inside itself, the fact of its own fictionality. Bikini Bottom, in these framings, is not a hidden real place on the ocean floor. It is a broadcast, a thing shown on a screen for the entertainment of humans like Patchy. And that sits in genuine tension with everything else, with the nuclear reading that treats Bikini Bottom as a real consequence of real bombs, with the afterlife readings that treat it as a real land of the dead. Which is it? Is Bikini Bottom a real place beneath a real atoll? Or is it a cartoon that a lonely human superfan watches on television? You have been told both, at different times, with equal confidence, and no one has ever once tried to reconcile them. I find this the richest puzzle in the whole cartoon, precisely because it is not a fan theory, it is canon, two contradictory accounts of what the thing is. And the theorists, interestingly, tend to walk right past it, because it is harder to make scary than nuclear mutation or lost episodes. But look at what it actually implies if you take it seriously. If SpongeBob is a television show within his own world, then the philosophical vertigo of Frankendoodle, the drawing that becomes alive, deepens into something even stranger. SpongeBob is not just a drawing that lives. He is, within his own fiction, a fictional character that humans know to be fictional, a cartoon whose own universe contains people who watch him for fun. He is fictional to the fictional humans above him, exactly as he is fictional to us. The layers stack. There is Patchy, watching SpongeBob on a screen. There is us, watching both Patchy and SpongeBob on our screens. And somewhere at the bottom of it all there is a little yellow sponge who, in one framing, is a real mutated creature living beneath a poisoned atoll, and in another is a bundle of drawn lines on a fan's television, and no one will tell you, with a completely straight face, which. Here is what I actually think, laid out plainly, because I do not want to leave you spinning. I do not think anyone is making a coherent metaphysical argument. I think, and this is the honest and slightly deflating truth, that these are simply different modes the writing adopts for different occasions. When it wants to be an ordinary cartoon adventure, Bikini Bottom is a real place, and the stakes are real. When it wants to do a self-aware, celebratory, breaking the fourth wall holiday special, it becomes a beloved television program with a human fan club president. The contradiction is not a hidden lore secret. It is the ordinary flexibility of a long-running comedy that never committed to a single theory of its own reality, because it never needed to, because it is a comedy for children, and consistency of ontology was never the point. But, and this is why I saved it for near the end, the fact that the writing is so casually willing to hold two completely incompatible accounts of its own existence is itself the deepest answer to the whole night. The reason SpongeBob can support a nuclear theory and an afterlife theory and a purgatory theory and a drawing is alive theory and a show within a show, all at once, without breaking, is that it never decided what it is. It left the foundations deliberately loose. It is a real place and a broadcast, and a poisoned reef, and a land of the dead, and a bundle of living drawings, whichever one a given episode needs it to be, and it never chose, and because it never chose, there is room under it for every reading anyone has ever brought. The looseness is the whole secret. There is no single hidden truth at the bottom of Bikini Bottom, because it was built, from the start, to be able to be almost anything. And that, finally, is the frame I want to sort everything through. But there is one more kind of darkness around this cartoon that has nothing to do with mutation or death or hidden messages, and it is the one longtime fans feel most sharply, so I want to name it before we close, because it is real even though it is not spooky. It is the darkness of watching something you love outlive the reason you loved it. There is a widely shared feeling among longtime fans that SpongeBob had a golden age, the early seasons before the first movie, and that something changed afterward. The first film, from 2004, was built almost like an ending, a grand finale, SpongeBob proving himself and the story reaching a natural close. And then it did not close. New seasons kept coming and coming, well past 15 of them now, and a great many of the people who grew up on those first years will tell you, with real feeling, that it was never quite the same after that intended ending, that some spark that lived in the early episodes thinned out over the long years that followed. Let me be fair here though, because this is contested, and it is partly just nostalgia, the ordinary ache of an adult missing the way a thing felt when they were small. Plenty of the later seasons contain wonderful episodes, and a new generation of children loves the current show exactly as fiercely as their older siblings loved the old one, and the idea of a clean golden age that ended on a specific date is more of a feeling than a fact. So I will not stand here and pronounce that SpongeBob died and became a hollow imitation of itself, because that would be overstating a matter of taste as if it were a matter of record. But I will say that the feeling is real and worth understanding, because it is its own kind of quiet horror, the horror of permanence, of a thing that will not end even when its story is over, that keeps producing new episodes forever, because it is beloved and profitable, and there is no reason to stop. And this connects, more directly than you might expect, to the man at the center of all of it. Stephen Hillenburg, the marine biologist who dropped the pencil into the sea and made this whole world wake up, died in 2018. It did not die with him. It has continued under other people, other showrunners, and it has grown outward into spin-off series, a show about the characters as children at summer camp, a show built around Patrick, a whole widening franchise, all of it made now by hands other than the ones that first drew it. And there is something really melancholy in that. The creator gone and the creation rolling on without him, bright and tireless and eternal. Exactly the changeless quality we have been circling all night, now true not just inside the fiction but around it. The world he built refuses to age or end, on the screen and off it. SpongeBob will keep waking up delighted and flipping burgers forever, in new episodes made by people who never met the man who dreamed him, and the little yellow sponge will never know that the artist above him, the one whose hand made him live, set down the pencil years ago and is gone. That is the darkness I actually find hardest. Harder than the creepypasta, harder than the nuclear reading, and it is the one nobody labels a theory because it is simply true. It is the ordinary sadness of art outliving the artist, of a creation becoming immortal precisely by being handed off, over and over, to strangers who keep it running. There is nothing sinister in it. The people making it now love it and want to do right by it, and Hillenburg himself, by every account, made his peace with it continuing beyond him. But if you want a disturbing thought to hold at the end of a video full of them, it is not that Bikini Bottom is a land of the dead. It is that Bikini Bottom is a land that cannot die, a bright, eternal place that will keep on being cheerful long after everyone who first loved it and the man who first drew it is gone, and that this immortality, which looks like a blessing, is the very thing the sadder theories keep mistaking for a curse. It cannot end. That is either the most comforting thing about it or the very opposite, depending entirely on the hour, and it is very late now, so let me hold it gently and move toward the last things I want to say. One of the last things worth understanding, and it explains why the creepypasta could borrow that trusted face so effectively, is that SpongeBob has always had a genuine talent for the grotesque, right there in its official animation, no theory required. This is a cartoon that regularly, deliberately, breaks its own soft, rounded style to hit you with an image that does not belong in a children's show. You will be watching something bright and gentle, and then, for a punchline, it will cut to an extreme close-up rendered in a completely different register, a hyper-detailed, almost photographic image of a character's face, every pore and hair and bead of sweat drawn with unsettling realism, teeth too wet, eyes too glassy, skin that suddenly looks like meat. It uses these hyper-realistic frames as a comedic weapon, a jolt of the uncanny dropped into the cozy, and it is honestly, intentionally disgusting and often, for a half-second, disturbing. The animators know the effect. They know that taking their own soft, safe characters and rendering them, briefly, in grotesque photographic detail produces a spike of wrongness in your gut, and they reach for that spike again and again, for laughs. That is the crucial thing to understand about why this particular cartoon breeds horror stories the way it does. The creepypasta we talked about earlier, the red-eyed Squidward, did not invent the idea of taking SpongeBob's trusted faces and making them realistic and wrong. It borrowed a technique the cartoon itself uses constantly. The official animation had already taught a generation that these characters could, at any moment, lurch into hyper-detailed grotesquerie, that the cozy surface was only ever a few frames away from something that looked like flesh. So when an anonymous writer wanted to make SpongeBob frightening, they were not fighting the material's nature. They were leaning into a door that had already been installed and propped open. The uncanny, realistic close-up is a native part of the SpongeBob visual language. The horror stories just took that native element and refused to cut back to the cozy afterward, held the grotesque frame instead of releasing it, and in that small refusal, they turned a comedy technique into a nightmare. I think this is deeply underappreciated as the real engine behind the dark reputation, more than any specific theory. It is not that SpongeBob has a hidden dark side that fans uncovered. It is that it wears its capacity for the grotesque openly, in broad daylight, as comedy, thousands of times, and that constant flickering between the adorable and the horrifying trains the audience to sense that the two are always close together in this world, always a cut apart. A cartoon that never once made you recoil would never have spawned a single creepypasta, because there would be nothing in its visual memory to build one from. SpongeBob spawned dozens because it spent 25 years teaching you, in its own official frames, that these faces you love can become something that turns your stomach, and then, most of the time, mercifully cutting away before it went too far. The theories and the horror stories are, in a sense, just the audience wondering what those frames would look like if the cutaway never came. And it is worth saying, because it keeps us honest, that this grotesque streak is not evidence of anything sinister in the cartoon's heart. It is a comic sensibility, a love of the gross and the exaggerated that goes straight back to the messy, tactile, faintly disgusting reality of the actual tide pool. The real ocean full of slime and teeth and strange wet bodies that the creator knew intimately. The grotesque in SpongeBob is not a dark secret leaking out. It is the sea itself, the real and slightly revolting biological truth of the sea, pressing up through the cheerful surface, because the person who made it had held those slimy real creatures in his hands and found them wonderful and a little horrible at once. Which brings me, at last, to the ocean itself, the real one, because the final and best answer to why this cartoon can hold so much darkness is that the place it is set is, in reality, far stranger and far more frightening than anything it ever dared to show you. Here is a thought I keep coming back to at the end of all this. Every disturbing theory we have gone through tonight is, in a sense, an attempt to find the darkness hidden inside a cheerful cartoon about the sea. But the deep sea, the real one, needs no theory. It is as alien and unsettling an environment as exists anywhere on this planet. And Stephen Hillenburg, the marine biologist, knew that better than almost anyone who ever made a children's cartoon. Think about what the real ocean floor is actually like. Below a certain depth there is no light at all, none. A permanent and total blackness that most of the creatures living in it have never once left. It is bitterly cold. The pressure is crushing, enough to collapse a human body. And down in that lightless, freezing, crushing dark, life did not give up. It adapted into shapes that look like nightmares. Fish with enormous teeth and dead black eyes. Creatures that make their own light to lure prey into their jaws. Transparent things and gelatinous things. And things with no name, because no one has ever seen them. In a world so vast and so unexplored that we know more about the surface of other planets than about the floor of our own ocean. That is the real setting of SpongeBob. Not the bright dome town, but the actual place it sits on, the deep Pacific floor, which in reality is a lightless abyss full of creatures stranger than any cartoon. And the man who made it had spent years of his life studying the smaller, shallower version of that world, the tide pools, which are their own kind of quiet horror if you look closely, full of things that sting and cling and devour each other, animals with no faces and no mercy, beautiful and alien and utterly indifferent to you. Hillenburg looked at all of that, the real biological strangeness of the sea, the teeth and the slime and the dark, and he did something remarkable with it. He did not make a horror show, which would have been the easy thing. He made the gentlest, warmest, most comforting cartoon of its generation, and he set it right on top of the abyss, and he let the strangeness show through only in flickers, in a grotesque close-up here, a lightless deep-sea town there, a soul-collecting ghost, a void of nothing where a squid screams alone. I think that is the real answer to the whole night, and it is a reassuring one rather than a frightening one, so let it land softly. The reason SpongeBob can hold so much darkness is not that it is secretly a dark cartoon pretending to be happy. It is that it is a truly happy cartoon, built, knowingly, on top of something dark and real and enormous, the actual ocean, which is one of the strangest and most frightening places in the known universe, and which the creator loved anyway, with his whole life, in full knowledge of what it was. The darkness the theorists keep finding is not a secret being hidden. It is the sea itself showing through. And a cartoon set on the real ocean floor is always going to have that abyss underneath it, no matter how many bubbles and jellyfish you put on the surface, because the abyss is where it actually lives. And at the very center of that abyss, the creator placed a hero that is, biologically, one of the strangest choices imaginable, and almost nobody stops to think about what it means. He chose a sponge, not a fish, not a mammal, not anything with a face or a brain in the real world. A sponge. Let me tell you, before we close, what a sponge actually is, because it is the quietest and strangest mystery in the whole thing, and it changes how you see him. A real sea sponge is one of the simplest animals alive. It has no brain. It has no heart, no nervous system, no organs in the way we understand organs. It does not move. It anchors itself to one spot and stays there, and it lives by letting water pass through its porous body, filtering out the tiny particles it feeds on, and letting the rest flow through. It is, in the plainest sense, a creature defined by what passes through it. It takes in the water around it, keeps a little, and lets the rest go. That is its whole existence. A soft, porous body sitting still, absorbing whatever the current brings, and releasing the rest, over and over, forever. And that is what the creator, the marine biologist, chose to build his hero out of. Not by accident. He knew exactly what a sponge was. Now set that real biology next to the character, and something clicks into place that is either beautiful or unsettling, depending, again, on the hour. SpongeBob is a creature defined by what passes through him. He absorbs the mood of everyone around him and reflects it back brighter. He takes in the world and keeps only the good and lets the rest flow through, which is exactly what makes him so relentlessly, impossibly happy, and it is exactly what a sponge does with water. The darker readings we walk through all try to find some hidden interior in him, some secret trauma, some buried self, the war veteran, the loop-trapped soul, the coping addict, but there is a simpler and stranger reading rooted in what he literally is. Maybe there is no hidden interior. Maybe SpongeBob is exactly what a sponge is, pure surface, pure absorption, a porous body through which the world passes, keeping the joy and releasing the pain, not because he is repressing anything, but because that is simply what he is made to do, filter the current and hold on to the good. That is not an empty creature. It is a creature with no room for darkness to settle, because everything flows through him and only the brightness sticks. I find that the gentlest idea in the whole video, and I want to give it to you as we drift towards sleep, because you have earned a soft landing after all this dark water. Every disturbing theory tonight has tried to put a shadow inside SpongeBob, and the biology of what he actually is gently refuses all of them. A sponge cannot hold a shadow. It is too porous. The pain passes through, and whether or not the creator consciously intended that meaning, and I will not claim that he did, the choice he made is real and it is perfect. He looked at the whole ocean, the abyss and the teeth and the crushing dark, and for his hero he reached down and picked the one creature that survives, simply by letting the current pass through it and keeping only what nourishes it, and he made that creature laugh. In a world that could be read as purgatory, as an afterlife, as a poisoned reef, as a land that cannot die, the little yellow sponge stays happy not because he is too foolish to see the darkness, but because he is built, body and soul, to let it flow right through him. And there is something almost holy in that, a small, soft, brainless creature at the bottom of the darkest place on earth, filtering out everything that would hurt and keeping only the light. There is one more piece of dark lore I want to give you before I start gathering it all up, and it concerns the building itself, the Krusty Krab. Because the place where all of this happens has a backstory that is grim, and it is also a place where people get the facts tangled. so let me set it down carefully. Over the years, more than one story has been told about the Krusty Krab and about Mr. Krabs' past, and fans sometimes flatten these into a single confused legend, so I want to be precise. There is more than one origin tale, and importantly, only one of them is actually about the building. That one is the dark one. In the cartoon's own telling, the structure that became the Krusty Krab restaurant was, before Mr. Krabs bought it and turned it into a burger joint, a retirement home, a rest home for the elderly, one that had fallen into bankruptcy. Pause on that for just a moment. The bright, beloved restaurant where SpongeBob flips his burgers with such joy, the warm center of the whole world, is built inside a building where old people once lived out their final days, a place that failed, went bankrupt, and was bought cheap and repurposed. There is something faintly haunting in that, the restaurant standing on the bones of a place of endings, the laughter and the grills sitting where the last years of strangers' lives were spent. It is the kind of real, textual darkness that is more unsettling to me than any invented creepypasta, because it is simply there in the canon, unremarked, a small grave beneath the happiest building in town. Now, the tangle, because this is where people go wrong, and I promise to keep us straight. The other stories are not about the building at all. They are about Mr. Krabs himself, his personal history, his past as a younger crab. In one of them, we learn that Mr. Krabs has a past as a pirate, that he once sailed and commanded a crew of his own, and that he left that life behind, firing his crew and giving up the sea. That is his biography, his personal past, not the origin of the restaurant. And here is the specific thing people get backwards. In that same story, Mr. Krabs dresses the restaurant up with props and practical effects to make it look like a ship, in order to fool a visiting relative, his own grandfather, who still believes Mr. Krabs is a pirate. That actually tells you the opposite of what the confused version claims. It tells you the building is not that old vessel. If it really were his former ship, he would not need to disguise it as one. So the restaurant was not secretly his pirate ship. It was a bankrupt rest home. He merely had a life at sea, once, in his own past, and later dressed his burger stand up to resemble a ship for a single afternoon. I lay this out in detail partly because it is a lovely little piece of dark lore in its own right, but also because it is a perfect small lesson in exactly the discipline this whole video has been trying to practice. The truth is more interesting than the tangle, but only if you keep the pieces where they actually belong. The building has a grim past, a failed retirement home. The crab has a colorful past, a life of piracy he gave up. Those are two separate true things, and the confusion comes from mashing them into one, from wanting a single grand unified dark origin, when the reality is a couple of smaller, stranger, unconnected truths sitting side by side. That is the theorizing instinct at its most tempting and most misleading. The hunger to connect everything into one story. And the reason I keep pulling us back to what is actually on screen is that the real facts, kept straight, are almost always richer than the neat legend that flattens them. A restaurant built in a dead rest home is a better and darker detail than a vaguely remembered story about a ship, precisely because it is true and specific and gently awful, and it needs no theory at all. And while we are standing inside that restaurant, there is one more really strange thing about it that hides in plain sight, which is the sheer scale of the town's devotion to the burger it sells. Watch how Bikini Bottom actually behaves around the Krabby Patty, and it stops looking like ordinary appetite and starts looking like something closer to compulsion. The whole town revolves around a single food from a single restaurant. There are episodes where the loss of the patty, or the loss of the formula, or a change to the recipe throws the entire population into something like withdrawal, a civic panic, a collective desperation that a normal town would never feel over a hamburger. Fans have leaned on this to revive the drug reading from a different door, arguing that the Krabby Patty functions in this world less like food and more like a substance the town is chemically hooked on, that the secret ingredient is secret because it is the thing keeping everyone dependent, and that Mr. Krabs is less a restaurateur than a supplier. I do not put any weight on that as fact, and there is nothing to confirm it, but I will grant that the devotion depicted really is disproportionate, a little unsettling if you watch it cold. An entire society organized around craving one thing that one crab controls and will not explain. Whether that is addiction or just very good branding, the cartoon never says, and the not saying is, once again, the part that lingers. So now let me gather up everything we have found and lay it down plainly, the true from the imagined, before I let you sleep. There were really 3 different kinds of thing in everything we covered tonight, and the whole trick of thinking clearly about this cartoon is keeping them apart, because they feel the same at 2 in the morning, and they are not the same at all. The first kind is what is actually true, confirmed, on the screen or in the record. The second kind is interpretation, the meanings we read into true things, which can be insightful or foolish but are always a step removed from fact. And the third kind is pure invention, the theories and stories that have no floor under them at all. Let me sort the night into those 3, quickly and gently, so you can carry the shapes of them into sleep without carrying the confusion. In the confirmed pile, the honestly true is more than you might have expected walking in, and it is the part worth keeping. The town really does sit beneath a real place that was really poisoned by real atomic bombs, and the people who make it have essentially acknowledged that the mutation reading is the point, which makes the nuclear theory the one that graduated from guess to canon. The dark episodes are real, aired, official, the wrong bus into the lightless deep, the tormenting of a small green creature to the edge of his life, the buried body, the ghost story that came true, the pie that was a bomb. The soul-collecting ghost and the undersea hell are real fixtures of the world. The freezer and the white void where a squid screamed a single word are a real episode. The restaurant really stands in a dead rest home. The hero really is a brainless filter feeder, chosen by a marine biologist who knew exactly what he was choosing. All of that is true, and all of it is dark, and none of it required a theory. It simply is these things, out in the open, waiting for anyone willing to look twice. That is the part that still surprises me, even now, at the end of a long night of talking about it. In the interpretation pile are the readings I think are worth holding, so long as you hold them as readings and not as revelations. Squidward as a portrait of depression, which the writing seems to half agree with. Mr. Krabs as a study in exploitation, dressed up as comedy, which distorts nothing and only asks you to stop laughing. Rock Bottom as depression, or as the immigrant's disorientation. SpongeBob's relentless cheer as a kind of survival, the way real people who have carried heavy things have found something true in him. These are not facts, and I have tried never to hand them to you as facts, but they are the good kind of interpretation, the kind that sends you back to the cartoon seeing more than you did before. Keep them loosely, they are lenses, not locks. And in the invented pile, the pure fanon, is a great deal of what gets repeated loudest, and it is the part you can set down entirely and sleep the better for setting down. The drug map, which rests on nothing, the elaborate lists of how each character secretly died, which are people playing in a sandbox and then pointing at their own toys as evidence. The idea that Gary is systematically abused, which runs against everything actually on screen, and, in its own clearly marked box, separate from all the theories, the creepypasta, the red-eyed Squidward, and the cursed lost episode, which is not a theory at all, but a horror story the audience wrote. Fiction about a cartoon, never a leak, never real, a ghost story, told about a friendly face, because there is no better way to frighten a person than to twist the thing that once made them feel safe. That is the whole night, sorted, and I want you to notice the shape of the pile when it is stacked up honestly, because I find it deeply reassuring rather than frightening. The confirmed darkness is real but gentle, the darkness of a cartoon set on a real and strange ocean, made by a man who loved that ocean and let its strangeness show through in careful flickers. The interpretations are thoughtful and often beautiful, and the disturbing, lurid nightmare stuff, the cannibalism and the drug addiction and the cursed tapes and the town of the dead, is almost entirely invented, projected onto a bright surface by an audience that could not quite believe something they loved that much was only what it appeared to be. It is not hiding a monster. We keep bringing the monster with us, because we are the ones who cannot let a beloved thing simply be kind. And understanding why we do that, why we go looking for shadows in the things that made us happiest as children, is the last thing I want to think about with you before you drift off. Because that is really what all of this is, when you step all the way back. Almost everyone who makes these theories, and almost everyone who loves them, grew up on SpongeBob. They watched it when they were small, when the world was simple and safe, and a talking sponge who loved his job was the funniest and most comforting thing imaginable. And then they grew up, the way everyone does, and the world stopped being simple and safe, and they learned about death and money and loneliness and all the heavy things the cartoon had been sitting on the whole time without telling them. And I think the theories are what happens when those two things meet. They are grown people going back to the thing that made them happy as children and looking at it through the eyes they have now, eyes that have seen the darkness the child could not see, and finding, to their surprise, that the darkness was faintly there all along, in the freezer and the deep bus and the greedy crab. The theories are a way of reconciling the person you were with the person you became, using the one cartoon that both of you loved. There is a hunger in it that I understand completely, the hunger for the things we loved as children to be as deep and as complicated as we have since become, so that loving them does not feel childish, so that the comfort we still take from a cartoon can be justified by finding hidden depths in it. If SpongeBob is secretly about nuclear trauma and capitalism and death, then an adult is allowed to keep loving it. If it is just a funny sponge, the adult has to admit they are seeking comfort in a children's show, and something in us resists that admission, even though there is nothing whatsoever wrong with it. So we theorize. We find the shadows, some real and some invented, because the shadows make our continued love feel grown up, and the internet gave that instinct a megaphone, a place where thousands of people could pool their shadows and build them into elaborate shared structures, until the fan theories became almost as much a part of SpongeBob as SpongeBob itself. But here is where I land, and it is the softest and truest thing I know about all of this. You do not need the shadows to justify loving it. The comfort was always the point. Stephen Hillenburg did not build this world to hide a nightmare in it. He built it out of his real love for a real and frightening ocean, to be a place of warmth and silliness and kindness, a bright small town at the bottom of the abyss, where a brainless little creature could be purely, uncomplicatedly happy, and where a tired child, or a tired adult, could go to feel safe for 11 minutes at a time. The darkness we find is real enough, and it is interesting, and it has kept us company all night. But it is not the meaning of the thing. The meaning of the thing is the kindness. And the fact that the kindness is strong enough to hold all this darkness we keep pouring into it, strong enough that you can theorize about nuclear death and purgatory and cursed tapes, and still, at the end of it, feel like putting the cartoon on and being comforted, that is not evidence of a hidden horror. It is evidence of how much light the little sponge actually carries. He lets the darkness pass right through him, and so, it turns out, can the story, and so, if you let it, can you. So let the theories go now. You have held them long enough for one night, and you do not have to carry them into sleep. Every one of them, the true and the interpreted and the invented alike, was really just a way of paying closer attention to something we loved, and attention is a kind of love, and love is a good thing to fall asleep on. You can pick them all back up tomorrow if you want to. They will keep. The nuclear reef will still be there in the morning, and so will the greedy crab, and so will the little sponge who lets it all wash through him. None of it needs you awake to guard it. SpongeBob SquarePants has been on the air for more than 25 years, which means there are grandparents now who watched it as children, and children watching it now who will one day be old, and through all those years and all those changes, it has stayed exactly what it was on the first day, bright and warm and strange and kind, a small yellow light at the bottom of the sea that simply refuses to go out. We spent tonight walking through every dark thing anyone has ever imagined about it. The mutations, the sins, the drug maps, the deaths, the buried bodies and the cursed tapes and the town of the drowned. And what strikes me most, now that we are at the end, is how completely it survives all of it. You can throw every shadow you have at Bikini Bottom and it just keeps glowing. That is a rare thing for any piece of art to do, to be beloved enough to inspire 1,000 nightmares and gentle enough that none of them ever stick. The theories will keep coming, because we will keep growing up and keep going back, and that is all right. It means the little cartoon is still doing its job, still giving each new set of tired eyes something to hold, something to wonder about, something to be comforted by long after the credits. The man who made it is gone now, scattered in the Pacific he loved, but the world he drew keeps waking up every morning delighted to be alive, and I think there are worse things to leave behind than that. A place that cannot be darkened, a creature that cannot hold a grudge or a grief, a small kind light at the bottom of the most frightening place on earth, still burning, still laughing, for anyone who needs somewhere gentle to rest, so rest. Let your breathing slow, let the theories dissolve, and let the last picture in your mind be the simplest and truest one. A little yellow sponge, asleep in a pineapple, his snail curled up beside him, the whole strange ocean dark and quiet around them, and nothing down there tonight but the soft sound of the water passing through. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and for letting these long, quiet ones be part of how you fall asleep. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.